Edward Kabasa, good morning.
Honorable members, let's pray. Tuombe. Ewe Mwenyezi Mungu ambaye kwa hekima na wema wako umeteua nyadhifa za viongozi na mabunge kwa ustawi wa jamii na utawala wa haki wa wanadamu. Twakusihi ututazame kwa neema nyingi sisi watumishi wako ambao umeridhika kutuita ili tutekeleze shughuli muhimu za jamhuri hii yetu. Twakuomba ututeremshie baraka zako sisi tuliokutanika hapa na utujalie tuyatende na kufikiria mambo yote yatakayofikishwa mbele yetu kwa njia ya haki na uaminifu, ili utukufu na sifa zako ziendelezwe na ili kustawisha amani, ufanisi na heri ya nchi hii yetu na wale ambao haja zao umezikabidhi mikononi mwetu. Amina. Honorable members, we do not seem to have the required quorum. So I order the bell to be rung for 10 minutes and the whips.
There is lack of quorum, and what that means is that the quorum bell will be rung for 10 minutes. The number required for business to begin, courtesy of the standing orders, is 50 members, so there has to be at least 50 members of the National Assembly seated in the chamber to allow business of the day to commence. And what happens is that, as you see on your screen, Honorable Chrysanthus Wamalwa has walked out. He is among the leadership in the House, and he is going to be mobilizing members who are within the precincts of Parliament to at least come into the chambers, take their seats, and allow business to commence. And as that is done, we'll take a look at the order of business this morning. The Employment Amendment Bill, National Assembly Bill number 15 of 2019 by the Honorable Martha Wangari, who is also the member for Gilgil constituency, will be debated. The balance of time on motion here is 3 hours 13 minutes. The debate resumes. The last time the members of the National Assembly did debate it was on 7th of August 2019 during the morning sitting such as this one. The Livestock and Livestock Products Marketing Board Bill, National Assembly Bill number 2 of 2019 by the Honorable Member Bashir Abdullahi is also in the order of business. If the members are able to dispense of the business that comes or precedes this particular bill, then it will be debated for the second reading. The Honorable Member for Starehe constituency, Honorable Charles Njagwa Kanyi, has a motion in the order of business, and the motion is on the review of mandatory retirement age in the public service. That aware that 75% of Kenya's population is under the age of 35 years, and that the overall unemployment among the youth is at 55%. Further aware that over 800,000 graduates from university, colleges, technical institutions, vocational centers, and other tertiary institutions join the job market annually, with only approximately 70,000 being absorbed into the formal labor force market. The member is concerned that the high rate of unemployment in Kenya, particularly among the youth, remains a major challenge. Cognizant that Article 55 of the Constitution requires the state to take measures to ensure that the youth gain access to relevant education, training, and employment, noting that the mandatory retirement age for public servants is set at 60 years. This House urges the government to review the mandatory retirement age in the public service from the current 60 to 50 years to, among other things, create opportunities for the employment of the youth. We are still waiting for quorum to be achieved, and as far as that is done, then I will hand you over so that you can follow the proceedings live. The Honorable Member, John Monene Wambugu, will also move a motion on policy measures to ensure 100% transition from secondary education to tertiary education. That this House resolves that the government puts in place policy measures to ensure 100% transition from secondary to tertiary education. The Honorable Member, Dr. John Mutunga, will also move a motion on the registration of farmers and formation of agribusiness entities for improved benefits and sustainable food and nutritional security. Quorum has been achieved.
Order, members. Order. Order, members. We now have the required quorum, and therefore business will begin.
Order number 1, administration of oath. Order number 2, communication from the chair. Order number 3, messages. Order number 4, petitions. Order number 5, papers.
Under this particular order, we have the leader of majority party.
Honorable Speaker, I beg to lay the following papers on the table of the House today, Wednesday, September 11th, 2019, in the morning sitting. The report of the Auditor General and the financial statements in respect of the following institutions for the year that ended 30th June 2018 and the certificate therein. National Social Security Fund, Siala Technical Training Institute, Ekurubo Gietai Technical Training Institute, and secondly, the report of the Auditor General and the financial statements in respect of the following constituencies for the year that ended 30th June 2018 and the certificate therein. Suna East, Madeira Constituency, Borabu, Sotik, Webuyo East, Kandui, Keio South, Emegwen, Tarbach, Eldas, Lagdera, Wajir West, Ijara, and Balambala.
Next order. What is it, Honorable Gikaria? What is out of order?
Honorable Speaker, I don't know whether this is the right time I should be raising this, that now that the majority leader has just laid some reports on some constituency on the CDF. Honorable Chair, I don't know whether it's, Honorable Speaker, sorry, I don't know whether it's the right time. Honorable Chair, we are in the third month and the end of the first quarter, and nothing has been said so far from the chair of the CDF. Particularly, if you look at the National Government CDF Act, stipulates very clearly that the membership of the CDFC members lapses after every 2 years. And you remember in the last 11th Parliament, Honorable Speaker, when it came, we lost almost 3 months trying to get the new members of the CDFC so that, again, the CDF could start operating. Honorable Speaker, I think it is a high time that the committee should be coming up first on matters of allocation to every constituency. Secondly, on matters of where has the board reached in terms of now the replacement of the other CDFC members, if and at all, if it's every constituency is going to have some changes, so that again we don't lose over the period of the transition, we don't lose a lot of time when we are going through the transition. And most importantly, Honorable Speaker, is that now that we are in the end of the first quarter and nothing has been said about this. So I think it is a high time the chair of CDF should update this House on matters of the CDF and where we have reached. You know, it might be very tricky for us. I'm not saying that because we are in charge of CDF, but at least now we are in the process of collecting proposals. Other constituencies have already done that. and yet we have not been given an update whatsoever. And secondly, Honorable Speaker, it's also, but this I don't know whether it's a petition I should be doing or whatever, because in my constituency, Honorable Speaker, the public gave proposals on matters to do with, there is a double standard within CDF. When you want to build a school, they ask you for some letters from the ministry, which you give, then they ask for land documents. And yet, other constituencies are continuing building schools in land that have not acquired titles, and yet they are denying others. Again, I think it is not fair for them to have...
I've given you a lot of time.
I'm sorry, Honorable Speaker, but I want to thank you for that.
Because it seems what you are raising is very popular with your colleagues, and the issues are fairly genuine. The only thing, of course, is that you are raising it at the wrong time. I'm trying to look around. I don't see the chairman of the CDF committee. I think the best option would be for you to raise in the afternoon, and then the chair will be informed in advance. I hope you are able to even talk to him yourself, or at least the members of the committee who are in this, who are in the house currently, can talk to the chair so that he can respond substantively. Because otherwise, we would not want an ambush on a matter which is very crucial like that one. So, makes sense, but let's raise it in the afternoon, right? What is it, Honorable Wandai?
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. On a different note, Mr. Speaker, I note that the majority leader has tabled a number of reports from the Office of the Auditor General. Mr. Speaker, it's also important to understand that that Office of the Auditor General fell vacant a number of weeks ago. Mr. Speaker, I'm raising this point because I've been away for some time, but I need to understand, because if the Office of the Auditor General is vacant, and I am happy that the leader majority is continuing to table the reports from that office, it must be understood by this House that no report can be tabled on this floor, or the floor of this House, from that office if the holder of that office is not in office. If the substantive holder of the office is not there. We run the risk, Mr. Speaker, of having no reports being tabled here from that office for purposes of our examination as Public Accounts Committee and Public Investment Committee. And therefore, my point of order, Mr. Speaker, is perhaps to inquire from the leader of the majority and perhaps ask that through your direction, he briefs the House on the progress that has been made insofar as the filling of the office of the Auditor General is concerned. I know there are timelines within the law.
You know, you raised on a point of order.
Yes.
Which meant that there was something which you thought was out of order. And the way you are prosecuting your case is like you are actually requesting the leader of majority. Then it means, therefore, in the first place, there was nothing which was out of order. You are actually trying to get away of making sure that the leader of majority responds to some issues, which makes sense.
I'm trying to do the best within the circumstances.
I'm trying to look at this thing that is out of order.
Mr. Speaker, I'm just trying to do my best under the circumstances.
I know.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I hope you will indulge me. So that the leader majority can advise the House the steps that are being taken to have the Auditor General recruited. And this is a matter that needs to be expedited. That's in short I'm saying to say, even though we know there are timelines and there are procedures within the law. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, well, good enough. The leader of majority is in the House. Of course, he has heard you.
Yes.
What I'm just grappling with is whether it is actually the leader of majority who is in charge of that process. But we can hear from him. I believe he must have something on it. Leader of majority, if you.
Mr. Speaker, on the onset, let me put the record straight that the documents we are tabling are signed by the former Auditor General, and they were submitted to the House before he left when we were on recess. So even this week, even today, so all those documents are authentic and they have been signed by our former competent Auditor General, Mr. Uko. But Mr. Speaker, even Parliament in legislating that office has failed because we did not create a safeguard on what happens. And from where I sit, even the executive or whoever is in charge has failed because that office, the vacancy in that office should have been advertised 6 months before the exit of the current Auditor General. Because as long as we delay, that means there will be no audit reports that will come from that office. That is the position in law. But I will agree with the chair of PAC that I will consult the head of public service to see how progress, both for the controller of budget and the Auditor General, what is the status, and it must be fast-tracked so that in the next 1 or 2 months, we must have a substantive controller of budget and a substantive Auditor General. Because, you know, that chair of PAC deals with the only items before him are audited accounts from the Auditor General. So if there will be no Auditor General, in the next 1 month, this man has no job. He will be redundant. So, in fact, the PIC is even better. They have something to do. But with him, every morning, he has to look for a document signed by the Auditor General. So, and it's good, you know, to be sometimes intelligent like Honorable Wandai. When some people want to make you redundant, you have to raise a red flag. So I will bring an answer.
You've been heard, leader majority. That is called succession planning. There should have been better succession planning. Is an act of good governance. So having had that, we'll go to the next order. And before we go to the next order, I will recognize in the speakers gallery pupils, I believe, or students from Sawa Excellent Educational Center, Kamukunji constituency of Nairobi County. Next order.
Order number 6, notices of motion. Order number 7, questions and statements.
On that particular order, we don't seem to have statements. So we'll proceed to questions. The first question, which would have been done by Flores Mutua, is taken to another opportune time. So we go to the member for Kimilili, Honorable Didimas Baraza Wekesa.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I rise to ask question number 384 of 2019 to the Cabinet Secretary for Health. Question A, how many patients have sought cancer treatment out of the country for the last 5 years? 2, what measures is the ministry taking to ensure that cancer diagnosis and management is carried out at all levels of hospitals in the country? I thank you.
Thank you very much. That one will be replied to before the Departmental Committee on Health. The next one would have been a question by Honorable Beatrice Nkadha. She has written that she's absent on some duty, so that one also will be placed before the next sitting. So we go to the member for, since also the member for Game has made a request, that one also will be skipped. So we'll go to the next one by the member for, or that is the last one. That is the last one. So we are through with questions, honorable members. So we'll go to the next order.
Order number 8, the Institute of Directors of Kenya Bill, National Assembly Bill number 3 of 2019. Question to be put.
This one had been canvassed to the end, so I proceed to put the question, which is that the Institute of Directors of Kenya Bill, National Assembly Bill number 3 of 2019, be now read a second time. Will as many as of that opinion say aye? Aye. Many of the contrary opinion say nay? The ayes have it. Next order.
A bill for an act of parliament to establish the Institute of Directors of Kenya to provide for the registration and regulation of the standards and practice of the profession and for connected purposes. Order number 9, motion, cervical cancer screening services to all women and issuance of the HPV vaccine to boys and girls by the national government.
That one also had been canvassed to the end, and what remained was the question to be put. And having confirmed that we still have the numbers, I proceed to put the question, which is that aware that the cervical cancer is leading type of cancer in the country, causing the greatest number of deaths, with at least 8 out of 10 women succumbing every day to the disease. Further aware that most women diagnosed with the precancerous changes in the cervix are in their 20s and 30s, but the average age of women when they are diagnosed with cervical cancer is mid-50s, considering that human papilloma virus, HPV, is one of the most common viruses in the world, with 4 out of 5, which is 80% of persons, getting some type of HPV at least once in a lifetime. Cognizant of the fact that men and women can get HPV, typically with the immune system getting rid of HPV without needing treatment, deeply concerned that HPV is a major risk factor in cervical cancer, with nearly 99.7% of the cervical cancer cases being caused by the infection of high-risk HPV, appreciating that the cervical cancer could be totally eliminated and further averted by putting preventive measures through timely treatment. This House therefore resolves that the national government rolls out screening services to all women and issuance of HPV vaccines to boys and girls to reduce the mortality rates and completely eradicate deaths caused by cervical cancer in the country. Will as many as of that opinion say aye? Aye. Many as of a contrary opinion say nay? The ayes have it. Next order.
Order number 10, the Radiographers Bill, National Assembly Bill number 47 of 2019, first reading. A bill for an act of parliament to make provision for the training, registration, and licensing of radiographers, to regulate their practice, to provide for the establishment, powers, and functions of the Radiographers Board of Kenya, and for connected purposes. Order number 11, the Banking Amendment Bill, National Assembly Bill number 55, 19, second reading.
Is Honorable Jude Jomo in the House? Yes, let's hear the member for Kiambu.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to read the Banking Amendment Bill 2019 to request it to be read for a second time. Mr. Speaker, this has been associated, the moving of this bill, Mr. Speaker, has been associated.
Of clarity. Are we doing the first reading or we are actually doing the second reading?
Second.
Yeah, because you are supposed to be now moving. So you move it. You are doing well, Honorable Jomo. So
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move that the Banking Amendment Bill 2019 be read for a second time. Mr. Speaker, the moving of this bill has been associated by a ruling by the High Court of Kenya that was done a few months ago. This was as a result of a case that was presented to court by a Mr. Boniface Odur, and the respondents in this case, Mr. Speaker, of the case that was presented were the Attorney General, the Kenya Bankers Association, the Central Bank of Kenya, and the Parliament of Kenya. And the court found it necessary to invite Kenya Consumer Federation to be part of the respondents to represent Wananchi. Mr. Speaker, I would like to remind members that before this happened, in 2016, we had, as a House, debated and assented to Banking Act Amendment Bill of 2016, which was passed by this House and signed by the President. And this was necessitated by the high interest rates that the banks were charging. There was a lot of conversation between business people and banks, between this Parliament and banks, to try and come to a sensible rate of interest that the banks were charging, but it never happened, and therefore it was found necessary to legislate on this so as to safeguard Wananchi from the high interest rates.
Thank you. It's not anything that should disturb Honorable, but we are following him very keenly. Could he be louder? Is it in order that he becomes louder? We want to listen to him. Thank you.
Maybe the mic has a problem, but I have no problem with my voice. Yes, I can even address the House without the aid of the public address system.
I actually am hearing you very well. I don't know whether it is maybe it's because Honorable Milemba is not seeing you, and you know sometimes.
Yes, eyes help.
There is an instinct that when you are not seeing the mouth of the member running. But let's go to the next one. See if you can go to the next mic.
Thank you. The honorable member has to believe in what he's not seeing. In what he's not seeing. So, Mr. Speaker.
I think let's see if
so, Mr. Speaker, maybe that microphone was not good. So, Mr. Speaker, it was necessary for this House, for this August House, to pass a law and protect Wananchi from the excessive interest rates that the banks were charging. And therefore, this law was passed in this House. It was debated for a long time. There was a lot of public support on this, and it was passed. But, Mr. Speaker, immediately this law was passed, this gentleman by name Mr. Oduri went to court. That was in 2016. And this case has been going on from 2016 until last year when it was ruled. Mr. Speaker, there were many prayers that were done in this particular case. But the courts found a few points that the courts requested that this August House should work on. Mr. Speaker, the High Court ruled that Section 33B(1) and 2 of the Banking Act were unconstitutional for being vague, ambiguous, imprecise, and indefinite. Mr. Speaker, the declaration was fortunately suspended for 12 months. This House was given 12 months within which to debate and correct the vagueness and those other corrections that the court found. And if we don't do it, if we are not able to do it within the 12 months, which are ending in March of next year, then automatically this law will be suspended. Mr. Speaker, subsection 3 of the Mr. Speaker, subsection 3 of the same section, the High Court declared that the penal provisions were unconstitutional, null and void for being discriminatory, contrary to Articles 27 and 29 of the Constitution, and an infringement of fair hearing under Article 50 of the Constitution. Mr. Speaker, what this means is that the officials of banks were going to be penalized if they charged excess of 4% above the central bank rate, while the person who is borrowing is not going to be penalized. So the court found that that was unfair and discriminatory, and therefore this need to be corrected. Mr. Speaker, I would like to maybe refresh members, honorable members, on what the provisions of Section 33 B1 and 2 said. Section 33 B1 says, a bank or a financial institution shall set a minimum interest rate chargeable for a credit facility in Kenya to at no more than 4%, the central bank rate set and published by the Central Bank of Kenya. The section 2 is, a person shall not enter into an agreement or arrangement to borrow or lend directly or indirectly at an interest rate in excess of the prescribed law. And 3, a bank or a financial institution which contravenes the provisions of subsection 2 commits an offense and shall, on commission, be liable to a fine of not less than 1 million shillings, or on default, the chief executive officer of the bank or financial institution shall be liable to imprisonment for a term of not less than 1 year. Mr. Speaker, the terms here which are being to be ambiguous and vague, one is the term credit facility. In this law, the term credit facility and loan are being used interchangeably. The term credit facility has not been defined in law, but the term loan has been defined in the law. And the term loan has been defined to mean loan includes any advance, credit facility, financial guarantee, or any other liability incurred on behalf of any person. So what the court wants us to do is either we define the term credit facility or we use a language that is well properly defined. Mr. Speaker, in this bill we have done that, and we have removed the word credit facility because the word loan takes care of even the credit facility, and that makes it a better language. The other problem, Mr. Speaker, is the 4 percentage point, the 4 percentage point the central bank rate set and published. The courts found that this is not clear whether we are moving over and above or below, and 2, the 4 percentage, it is not properly documented on what rate are we setting this. Because there are several rates in central bank. There is a central bank rate, there is the Kenya Bankers Reference Rates, and other rates in central bank. So,
Mr. Speaker, this is Honorable John Mbadi.
Well, order Honorable Millie Odhiambo. The SUBA which Honorable Mbadi is representing is that one which you are not. So,
actually, Mr. Speaker, Honorable Millie should be reminded that I'm the Member of Parliament for the original SUBA.
Yes.
She is.
What is your point of order?
She's MP for.
Honorable Akoth.
She's MP for a delegated.
What is your point of order?
Mr. Speaker, is Honorable Mbadi, in order to mislead this House, if you look at the population of his SUBA, they are fewer than us. So they are not the original one. They are our sisters, but because we were given a wrong name, which they stole, so they became the SUBA South. We are the North. But otherwise, now, they are not original. We are both SUBAs, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Millie, 2 things. Number 1, I have no issues. I don't want to get into your local politics. But most importantly, now you pronounce that name Mbadi in English, not in SUBA, because you pronounce it in a manner that we couldn't follow. But proceed, Honorable Leader of Minority, Honorable.
You know, Mr. Speaker, Honorable.
And you can as well ignore that, because really,
I'll ignore it, but Honorable Millie represented.
The population census will come out in 3 months. We don't want to
Actually,
get into
Honorable
it now.
Mele represented a constituency called Mbeta up to just the other day. And that time I was representing a constituency called Soba. We decided to divide the name and give them Soba North and retain Soba South. So I am properly the MP for the original Soba. But Mr. Speaker, that notwithstanding, I am rising to do a very noble duty of seconding the motion as moved by Honorable Jude Njomo regarding the amendments to the Banking Act. And Mr. Speaker, the main reason why we move motions and second them is to bring clarity, just like Honorable Jude Njomo has tried to do, and to explain, because banking issues is actually a technical issue for the members to understand and appreciate, so that when they are contributing to this bill, they contribute from a clear point of information. There's been a lot of misrepresentation and misinformation about what this bill seeks to do, and I think we need to clarify that so that honorable members understand what exactly this House is about to do. Mr. Speaker, let me start by saying that the issue of controlling bank interest rates is actually a long history in this country. It started way back, and it came as a result of the outcry by the public. Kenyans were complaining about the high interest rates that banks were charging. And Mr. Speaker, this was not for a wrong reason. Banks in this country actually converted themselves into what one would call a cartel. Ordinarily, as a professional in financial matters, I would not support the regulation or other legislation to cap interest rates. But Mr. Speaker, the banks decided to go rogue, and therefore it required the intervention of people's representatives. Mr. Speaker, one would ask, how come Chinese contractors find it very easy to do business in this country? The reason is simple. Chinese contractors borrow loans at interest rates of 2 and 3%. How our contractors cannot go to our banks and access loans at below 14%. Mr. Speaker, this brings inequity in terms of competition. And I call our banks for what they are, economic saboteurs, Mr. Speaker. They are sabotaging the economic progress and development in this country. And therefore, it was necessary for this House to come out strong and come and intervene in a distorted financial market. Mr. Speaker, but I know I will contribute to this when we come to finance bill, but I think the Treasury is not helping this country, because instead of curtailing their appetite for borrowing, what the Treasury is doing is they have substituted the ordinary Kenyans who are supposed to borrow from the banks. They are the ones which are borrowing. And that therefore means that ordinary Kenyans cannot access the loans that at rates that are affordable, the aim and intention of the amendment that Honorable Jude Njomo brought in 2016. But having said that, Mr. Speaker, what therefore are we dealing with today? Immediately, and as Honorable Jude Njomo has put it, immediately this law was passed, this bill was passed into law and assented to. Some individual, Kenyan, and he has his right, Mr. Speaker, called Boniface Oduor, went to court. And Mr. Speaker, who did this gentleman sue? Whereas it is Parliament that passed this law, Parliament was not sued. Instead, Oduor sued CBK and Oduor sued Attorney General as respondents. In fact, Kenya Bankers Association, COFEC, and Parliament, National Assembly, decided to go as interested parties in court. Now, when you look at the defense that was given by Central Bank basically supported the petitioner, and yet they were the respondent in court. And Attorney General did the most poor show in court. And therefore, it is clear and it is evident that the person who went to court is not Boniface Oduor, but is actually Central Bank. Then the question is, why would an institution created by law go to court disguising itself as an individual, but going to court to sue an act of Parliament or to challenge an act of Parliament? This, I would call for what it is actually a public deceit, and an attempt to defeat justice. And we need to tell central bank that we actually came up with this law because of the failure of the central bank to regulate the financial sector. If central bank was effective and efficient in regulating the financial sector, there would be no need for this law. But Mr. Speaker, I am happy, and this is where I want honorable members to pay attention to and be keen on, because this has been misreported. The misreporting was that the courts annulled, or rather said that this law is unconstitutional, and therefore we are likely to go back to the former unregulated interest rate regime. That is not true. I want to thank the judiciary for having refused to accept the argument by the petitioner to annul this law, to take us back to where we came from. In fact, the only thing that the courts did was to ask Parliament to clarify some ambiguities in this legal provision, and which I agree to entirely, as I'm going to shortly explain. Mr. Speaker, the judiciary therefore asked us to amend mostly Section 33B of the Act. And the following is what the court pronounced itself to, and what the Honorable Jude Njomo now today wants corrected. First, if you look at this law, Section 33B in the Act, 1, it says that a bank or a financial institution shall set the maximum interest rate chargeable for a credit. That is where the issue is. The courts found ambiguity in us asking that there should be a maximum interest rate without defining the period. So the courts have asked us to define the period, and we are saying annual maximum interest rate. Because if you just leave it open like that, some mischievous characters may decide, Mr. Speaker, to charge the 4% daily, hourly, yearly. But now we are going to be very clear in this law, and that is what Honorable Jude Njomo is trying to do, that a bank or financial institution shall set the maximum annual interest rate chargeable. So we are adding the word annual so that we don't leave it ambiguous. The other thing that is being changed is from credit facility to loan. Mr. Speaker, the Act, as it is, has contained the word loan consistently in its usage. But the amendment that Jude Njomo had initially introduced, which is now in the law, is a credit facility. First, credit facility was found to be ambiguous, and therefore the courts asked us to clarify that. Now we are making clarity and taking it back to the word loan, so that it is consistent with the Act and also it is clear. The other thing that is also coming out clear now, which Honorable Jude Njomo has added, which was not asked for by court, is to clearly define what is this central bank rate. And Jude Njomo is saying in his amendment that, the Honorable Jude Njomo is saying in his amendment that we are talking about that rate that is mentioned under Section 36(4) of the Central Bank Act. And that is what talks about the base lending rate. So that there is no ambiguity, that we are clear that any financial institution, banks, and by the way, if you read too, even Shylocks should be worried. The Shylocks who are loaning people at 30% should be worried, because they are not left out in this definition. If you read Section 2, it talks about a person shall not enter into an agreement or arrangement to borrow or lend directly or indirectly at an interest rate in excess of that prescribed by law. That does not leave out Shylocks. They cannot lend beyond what is prescribed in law. And therefore, the base lending rate, which is prescribed under Section 36(4) of the Central Bank Act, is what we are referring to, and that is what we are saying, that the 4%, should no financial institution or anybody, whether bank, should not charge above 4% of the base lending rate. So that is the clarity that this bill seeks to do. And Mr. Speaker, something else that also needs to be clarified here, and which the courts had asked us to do, is to be clear on the penalty. Because if you look at the original law, the law as it is today, it says that a bank or financial institution which contravenes the provisions of subsection 2 commits an offense and shall on conviction be liable to a fine of less than 1 million shillings, or in default, the chief executive officer of the bank or financial institution shall be liable to imprisonment for a term not less than 1 year. This is ambiguous, Mr. Speaker, I want to agree. Because you're saying it is the bank or the financial institution that shall be liable to a fine. And if that fine is not paid, then the CEO should be imprisoned for a term not less than 1 year. Meaning, if the financial institution or the bank is ready to pay 1 million, the bank can just go ahead and charge the 4% interest rate, more than 4% interest rate, and be able to pay 1 million. What is 1 million to a bank or a financial institution? And you are saying that the CEO would only be held responsible if that amount is not paid. So you are basically not holding the CEO responsible. Now, when you bring the amendment that the Honorable Jude Njongo is bringing, that any person, now it is not a bank, financial institution, but any person who contravenes the provisions of subsection 2 commits an offense and shall on conviction be liable to a fine of not less than 1 million shillings or to imprisonment for a term not less than 1 year. Mr. Speaker, this now makes it very clear that if you are a CEO of a banking institution or a financial institution and you preside over your institution violating this law or contravening this law, you shall be personally held liable and you shall be fined as an individual and you shall be jailed or imprisoned as an individual. I think this, to me, makes it very, very, very clear. And again, Mr. Speaker, this is a very small bill, by the way. The amendment is very small, condensed, and my job was just to try to make it clear so that members understand it. I have shared with a few members, and some members actually thought that probably we are removing the 4% interest rate capping. That is far from it. What actually Honorable Jude Njomo is seeking to do, Mr. Speaker, is simply to bring clarity, as was directed by the courts, so that come March 2020, when the deadline that the courts gave us shall lapse, we shall be in conformity with the court order, but we shall not only be in conformity with the court order, but we shall also have clarified and made the law more user-friendly. My final remarks is to the banking sector. Let them demonstrate through action. If they want cooperation from this House, demonstrate through action that they are concerned about their customers, that they are concerned about the plight of Kenyans. Mr. Speaker, look at this Fuliza that I hear people borrow money. It is basically the poor which is borrowing money with Fuliza. And Fuliza is being managed by major financial institutions whose shareholders are wealthy Kenyans. Mr. Speaker, this is one way of expanding and enlarging the gap between the poor and the rich. Because you are taking money from the poor at very exorbitant interest rates and giving it to the rich to share as dividends. Mr. Speaker, it is criminal, it is unethical, and it should stop. We should even ask why these Fulizas, because they are also being managed by financial institutions. Why is it that they are charging higher rates than what is prescribed in law? We want to ask central bank, why are you allowing these financial institutions to charge higher rates for products which they create outside the normal banking process? Mr. Speaker, that is also covered in this law, and there is no excuse. The central banks need to rein on these people. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I second.
So before I propose a question, let me recognize in the public gallery pupils from Crisco Educational Center from Kibra constituency of Nairobi County, and girls from Lynn Pets Ambassadors School from Dagoretti South of Nairobi County. So I propose a question, which is that the Banking Amendment Bill, National Assembly Bill number 55 of 2019, be now read a second time. I see top on the list is Honorable Manzo Gitonga.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me an opportunity to support this very important bill. Mr. Speaker, as an advocate of the High Court of Kenya, I had an opportunity to look at the judgment and to look at the parties who went to court and the general discussion which took place in court. Mr. Speaker, you realize that Boniface Oduor was a pupil at the law firm of the lawyers of the Central Bank of Kenya. And although the Attorney General was sued, even the day judgment was given, the Attorney General was absent in court. And generally, this judgment, although it was brought in bad faith, I really want to encourage Honorable Judy Jomo that now we are going to make even a better law. Mr. Speaker, when the first amendments came to this House, they were thoroughly criticized, and the banks assumed that since this bill was finally going to be ascended to the head of state, and the head of state, the Honorable His Excellency Uhuru Kenyatta, is a serious businessman in this country and probably also has interest in banking, will probably not assent into this law. And therefore, they were surprised when the president acted in the best interest of majority of Kenyans. And therefore, as soon as he signed this into law, it was fought immediately. And while the petitioner was trying to come up with reasons why this particular petition should be admitted, he went on to say there was a wide debate on this particular matter, and it had eluded a lot of public interest. And that's why finally the judge denied this young man costs in this matter, and each party was advised to bear their own costs of this particular petition. Mr. Speaker, if you look at it, generally you find that there was a likelihood that if this petition went through as it did, and these amendments were brought afresh, most probably they were going to be defeated on the floor of this House, or secondly, the President may refer them back to the House, which complicates the matter. But I believe, again, the President of the Republic of Kenya is going to act in the best interest of Kenyans, and I believe also this House will this time around support this bill in a big way, because we represent Kenyans in this House, and I believe when we represent Kenyans in this House, we are also, as a parliament, as a House, acting in the best interest of the common Kenyan, the one who is not likely to grow economically or to invest in businesses unless they take a loan. When President Kibaki became the head of state in 2003, he really encouraged commerce in this country, made the atmosphere very good for people to borrow, and many Kenyans borrowed from banks, and despite the heavy interest rates, a lot of Kenyans were able to grow the economy. So there is a reason why interest rates should be capped, so that, Mr. Speaker, Kenyans are not exploited by the banks, and secondly, there is a balance and inclusivity in the financial sector, so that as many Kenyans as possible can grow businesses. And when many Kenyans as possible grow businesses, then even the banks do better. So the banks should encourage many, because if you put the interest rates very high, very few people end up borrowing. And if you put interest rates reasonable, then the banks will have even more customers borrowing. And as a practitioner in this field, I can assure this House that after the capping of interest, a lot of Kenyans now went to borrow, but the banks were really not making money as such, and therefore probably what has stated or made it possible for someone to go to court and petition. I want to say that courts, in one way or another, make law. And that's why the courts, the Constitutional Court has guided us to be able to relook at this matter again, bring it to the floor of the House, and has even given it 12 months, meaning our law is still acting, it is still in place up till expiry of 12 months. And therefore, the reason why this House has to move with speed and pass this law so that it goes through all the processes, and within a year, we'll have replaced
And
the older law.
Who is this member? Who is that member? Okay, you can exit.
Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So that we could have a better law in this country, better manage the finances, the financial status of Kenyans, and also savings. And Mr. Speaker, one of the other practices Kenyans should do to check the banking industry is to invest more in credit unions or SACCOs or saving, through cooperatives. What are other countries who have, increased the capacity of the cooperatives? For example, one of the best performing SACCOs is Arambe SACCO, and also Mwalimu SACCO, and all of them, and many other SACCOs bank with banks. If we come up with amendments of the cooperative law, because the law we are operating on is historical now, it was not well amended to rhyme with the new constitution. Mr. Speaker, we'll have a lot of SACCOs, including our own parliamentary SACCO and other SACCOs we save in, so that they operate almost like banks, and SACCOs' interests are much lower than the ones in the banks. And you find, if Kenyans do that, they'll still find a solution into this problem. Should this law not go through this time, should it not get presidential assent, then the solution is investing in SACCOs properly and converting even our own SACCO here into a back office, and we can be able to operate our own SACCO even as a bank. And that will also create competition within the banking industry, and even Kenyans will increase the savings, and we still serve the same purpose of Kenyans enhancing themselves financially and making sure that we are able to borrow and grow businesses, Mr. Speaker. Because only the rich were able to flourish in the earlier law before we brought the amendments. But when these amendments were brought and they were successful, many Kenyans were able to access credit, to access loans, and upon accessing these loans, they were able to grow businesses, pay more taxes.
Members, you must listen to the honorable member in peace and quiet. Who are those two members who are, you consult in lower tones? Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, we must really encourage good practices, good financial practices in this country. We must, follow our constitution and make sure that no Kenyan is exploited by one institution or another, or banks, so that all Kenyans have a medium of which we can grow economically and can be able to encourage as many Kenyans as possible to grow wealth, so that we can eradicate poverty and we can give Kenyans a better life. And when you look at the amendments and the clarity which the court sought to be included for further amendments, it is an opportunity to make the law even better. Although it's now a blessing in disguise, the Honorable Jude Jomo, and we should not tire in the effort to fight for Kenyans, and we are all supporting you in this house to make sure that this good law for Kenyans succeeds, and the Kenyans are able to be able to borrow and to have a law which can serve Kenyans. Because law is meant for prosperity, and law is meant such that all people in the country can be able to be safeguarded by that particular law, and use that particular law for prosperity, and to be able to grow and to better their lives. So the Kenyans should not tire, and at the same time, we should encourage a saving culture in country through the SACCOs, cooperative movement, and also through the banks, so that for those who ascribe to the banks, then we can use that particular channel. And therefore, that necessitates the need for us to have a proper law, a serious law, which protects the common mwananchi, commonly known as Wajiku or Mwikali. And for that matter, Mr. Speaker, I want to support the Honorable Jude Jomo and encourage as many members as possible to support this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Now let's have Honorable Tongi Nyagaka.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to speak into this motion, Mr. Speaker. which touches on the lives of Kenyans. And we are here in Parliament to protect the lives of Kenyans because essentially without people, we have no country, Mr. Speaker. Our economy, we are whining every other day saying that the economy is not doing as well as it should. And we know the contribution that the banks have to make towards the economic growth. And therefore, when we are concerned about the charges coming from the banks, the Speaker, is a legitimate concern, which concern should worry every one of us. But how we approach it, Mr. Speaker, is a big question, is the elephant in the room, Mr. Speaker. The question we need to ask ourselves, are we going to punish people for their success? Are we going to punish the banks because they are making money? Would we let our situation to where they are not making money, then we punish them? And we also have in the same economy, Mr. Speaker, with the same parameters, banks which are struggling. We have seen a matchup between NPK and the KCP, Mr. Speaker, which the reason why there has been that match is because NPK is not doing well, Mr. Speaker. So it's not fair to say that banks are making a lot of money and therefore they should be punished, for lack of a better word, so that they can accommodate the Kenyans. We also need to appreciate that in the same economy, banks are struggling, and only those which are managed prudently, like KCP, Cooperative Bank, Barclays, and just but to Equity, just but to mention a few, are making profits. They're not making profits because Kenyans are being overcharged. They're making profits because they are well managed with the qualified management and a very competent board of directors, Mr. Speaker. So the question we need to ask ourselves, is it just enough to raise or lower or raise the interest rates or lower the interest rates, Mr. Speaker? Because again, we cannot do that in isolation of the facts of the behaviors of Kenyans, because the institutions, we are operating under an economy, they are operating in the economy and the traits and the behaviors of the people, and we have history which governs, which has guided this country this far, Mr. Speaker. As a former banker, Mr. Speaker, I'll tell you, before a customer is admitted in a bank, there's something we call KYC, know your customer. And we do it thoroughly to understand and appreciate our customers. And we appreciate them all with their predicaments. We understand that we all can't be the same, Mr. Speaker. But again, it's good to have a culture, it's good to encourage our people to know that when you borrow money from the bank, Mr. Speaker, that money is meant to make your life better. It's meant to grow your business. But we have a culture in Kenya where people borrow money from the bank, Mr. Speaker, to go and buy a suit, to go and buy clothes, to go and enjoy themselves, throw a party for friends. Mr. Speaker, certainly that's going to affect how we are going to handle our finances. So we need to appreciate that banks have done their bit, but even capping the interest rates, Mr. Speaker, alone is not a panacea. It's not going to solve our concern. It's not going to solve everything that we are talking about, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if we must cap the interest rates, then maybe we need to, Mr. Speaker, can I? Thank you. Mr. Speaker, if we have to control the capping, we have to put the capping of interest rates, Mr. Speaker, it's only fair maybe we consider the lower interest rates, Mr. Speaker. If the lower interest rates are controlled, are left open, we can control the upper limit, but we can't control both the upper and the lower limit, Mr. Speaker, because then you are not leaving the banks a room to play around with their numbers. When you are telling them that you must pay interest on this kind of interest on these deposits of so much, and yet at the upper you have also sealed that, Mr. Speaker, most banks will have difficulties in operating under the same circumstances. But if we have to do that,
the Honorable Tongi.
Yes, sir.
You seem to have disappeared.
Yes, they disconnected me, Mr. Speaker. Apparently, people who don't like banks making a lot of money, maybe
I think you are saying very interesting things, but you are not very clearly audible. I would suggest that you come to the front here.
Thank you, sir.
His time is not finished. The Honorable Tongi, you still have 6 minutes. Yes, proceed from there.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for being mindful of your brother. You are being a keeper of your brother. We appreciate that, Mr. Speaker. As I was saying, Mr. Speaker, controlling the interest rates alone is not going to solve the concern that Kenyans are having about the banks, Mr. Speaker. Again, we appreciate that even with the controlled interest rates, Mr. Speaker, some banks are making profits and others are struggling, Mr. Speaker. We know in this economy, Mr. Speaker, as I earlier said, we have banks which have made good profits, and there are some banks who have not made profits, Mr. Speaker. They're actually at the verge of winding up. I mentioned the NPK, which has been struggling, Mr. Speaker, despite the massive government investment in it. So it's not just enough to say that banks are making profits, but it's also good to appreciate the leadership and the management of the banks which have made profits. A bank like KCP, Mr. Speaker, under the leadership of Oigara, banks like Cooperative Bank, Mr. Speaker, under the leadership of Morioki and many other banks, Mr. Speaker, Equity, just but to mention a few, are managing their money and their practices prudently.
What is out of order? The Honorable Tongi, just hold on. Let us hear what Chris Wamalwa.
Mr. Speaker, in terms of relevancy, the Honorable Member whom I have a lot of respect, what we are debating on the amendments pertaining the ambiguity. We are not talking about the issue of profitability as based on the capping interest. Is it in order to talk about relevancy in this case, Mr. Speaker?
The Honorable Tongi is relevant. Proceed, the Honorable Tongi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for informing Daktari, because we have today a preamble and it all addresses and speaks to the same thing, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have microfinance institutions. If we have to address the interest rates, Mr. Speaker, and the ambiguity therein, it should apply across the board, Mr. Speaker. We have the mobile money, Mr. Speaker, facility, which has actually destroyed the Kenyan fabric, the Kenyan youth, Mr. Speaker. I have cases, Mr. Speaker, of the youths who I was trying to help secure some employment somewhere. Mr. Speaker, some of them were denied an opportunity because they already listed as not credit worth, Mr. Speaker. And all this is because of the money being availed at their disposal without any KYC, without having to do any KYC, Mr. Speaker, because KYC enables the creditor, the person giving the loan, to appreciate the quality of person you are giving the loan, Mr. Speaker. So when this mobile money, Mr. Speaker, is given freely almost to the customer without any procedure, Mr. Speaker, and our youths are not educated enough in terms of exposure to appreciate that a loan is not just in money to go and entertain your friends, to buy yourself, reward yourself, for lack of a better word, Mr. Speaker. They need to appreciate that this is money which is meant to make your life better in terms of growing your business, Mr. Speaker. And until such a time that we have prepared our people to appreciate that loans, Mr. Speaker, is a cost. It's an asset to the bank, but to you as a person who has taken the money, it's a cost. And therefore, whenever you borrow money, Mr. Speaker, you must use it in a way which is going to create an income for you, going to create employment for you, going to create more money for you, so that you have something for yourself and something to give out to where you are borrowed, Mr. Speaker. The M-Pesa, Mr. Speaker, if you look at it and you compute the money we are charging, they're charging even for their transaction, Mr. Speaker, is actually abnormal. Because if you annualize the money they're charging us when you are doing a transaction, for example, you are sending 5,000 shillings to somebody out there, and they are charging you about 100 and something shillings, Mr. Speaker, that's abnormal. That's a lot of money. Compare that, Mr. Speaker, with what the banks would be charging. It's abnormal, it's not accepted. Mr. Speaker, as I wind up, I can see the warning is up. Mr. Speaker, there is in countries which have succeeded in matters of finances, have had to come up with construction banks. Look at China. They have our government has come up with a construction bank which is mainly targeting foreign construction, foreign works. And therefore, they're creating employment by so doing because of the interest rates they're charging. And this is not for everybody. It's meant for a given segment of a market. And maybe it's time that Kenya as a country also come up with that kind of a policy where we come up with a fund which is going to be controlled, targeting maybe a given section of the the market, Mr. Speaker. If it's a construction, we come up with that kind of policy so that our contractors are able to compete with the Chinese and the foreigners in the country. Because what is happening, Mr. Speaker, at the moment is that a Kenyan contractor is meant to borrow money from the market at an interest rate of about 7%, about 14%, whereas a competitor from China is going to borrow money at an interest rate of about 1%, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, the undercutting in the construction industry is real. These guys, contractors from outside, from abroad, are able to compete at a higher rate than we are able to compete because of the kind of rates they are getting from their market, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, as I wind up, maybe that's another way to look at the concern of the interest rates.
Your time is up.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I support with the caveat that we remove the lower interest rate capping as we control the upper, because then we are giving the banks a chance to be able to manipulate and work with their numbers. Thank you.
Very good contribution, the Honorable Tongi. We shall now have the Honorable Muli Fabian, member for Kangundo.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker, for giving me the opportunity to join my colleagues in the preparation of a banking amendment bill by Honorable Judy Jomo. First, Honorable Speaker, I appreciate the factual fact that Honorable Judy thought the issues of banking and especially for protecting Kenyans. Our Kenyans don't borrow because they plan to borrow. They borrow because of economical pressure and the disparitions caused by economical factors like failure to have capital to start business, failure to have enough resources to build your house, failure to be able to have a physical planning in terms of money. And this is why our Kenyans end up borrowing money to do those things. In these factors, our people find themselves cornered with the banking institution, Shylocks, and also the phenomena of mobile banking. Honorable Speaker, I bring to this House the allure of putting our people in hard time, especially think that when you borrow money, you'll be economically put in a good place, is making even some people go to suicide. And I'm saying that this bill has come at the time when even our Kenyan youth, almost 90% of our Kenyan youth, they are in threat to CRB because of mobile banking. If we don't come up with a system to control the issue of borrowing and to give a proper system and operating factors which how to borrow money and how the borrower, the lender is supposed to bring the invitation to treat. How say there must be invitation to treat because many consumers, they have been lured, especially in banking industry, by a very lengthy English. An English which will talk terms which you are not able to understand, and our people, they end up being invited to engage in the contract which they don't understand. But now, with the bill which has come up with Judy, it is giving the standard operation of the 4%, which is to be the capping rate, which can give the banks also to make profit. Today, we can see many countries, they have grown from third world to second world. If you see Western countries now, they are talking about they are in second world. They did not go to second world because they had capital somewhere. They have gone through loans. Many individuals, many commercial entities, they have grown because of loan. So loans are good. But before we say our people to engage in loan, have we made a good environment for people to borrow? I'm saying this because, like Shylock, there are some cases where our people, they are given a loan, they are given a money by Shylock to pay interest of 60% within a month. Earlier, microfinance system, they will come up with their terms, which they will tell you you pay money within 3 months, and the running rate will be also 19%. At the same way, The money which they are saying a long facility, they get it from central bank. The money which they are giving, actually, they don't give the money which is their money. They're also giving the money which they have been given by central bank. So I'm saying that this is the best way to come up with this bill. We are not saying that banking industry cannot make loan by using 4%. The 4%, if you do all the valuation, you make sure that your customer can be able to pay the money back, it will give you a proper returns. But because of fishy operation in the industry, people want to make money tomorrow. They want to misuse our customers. And this bill, we can let it go. There is collusion in the court by the fusion of the law that there was a president said some people in the matters of propaganda in the media, they are saying that this bill was thrown away. Despite the fusion of the law, there is nowhere in the world we can let our people to be given money without the laws. We must have the proper laws for people to give money, especially capping rates, especially defining what is a credit, especially defining what will be even the security. So, Honorable Speaker, Kenya is in that word. We are in the economical or growing country. Institutions, many institutions, they ran very fast. We forget that if we want this country to grow from third world to second world, also our citizens, their pockets should grow to come to second world. If we let institutions to give people loan, they make too much money, our people will end up being the customers of auctioneers. So our people will end up going back while saying the economy is growing. So that's why, Honorable Speaker, I say we have to support this bill, and it needs to be implemented immediately as possible. This House has passed very important bills which we don't see them being in operation. It is true. Some people in executive will feel that the capping rate of 4% is not fair. But I'm telling people in executive that the law we make in this House, we are not making for present honorable members or the present people in executive. One day, they won't be there. One day, they won't be in that office. One day, these honorable members, they won't be in this House. So I'm asking honorable members, we support this bill, and I support it 100%, and I also request the banking industry. They are operating for the benefit of Kenyan people. They should see this bill also important. And if any case where they feel that is challenging, this House is ready to receive any proposal from them. But I think this is the high time we need to support this bill. And Mr. Speaker, I say thank you, and I support this bill. Thank you.
The Honorable Pokose.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker, for allowing me to contribute to this Banking Amendment Act, Nini Bill. Honorable Speaker, on the onset, I want to support the amendments that are being brought by Honorable Jude Njomo, and more so based on the ruling that the court gave. And therefore, this amendment, Honorable Speaker, is seeking to make clarifications. Honorable Speaker, having listened to the presentation by Honorable Jude Njomo and realizing that the person who went to court to sue the central bank, to sue the Attorney General on the Banking Act that had been done by this Parliament and assented to by the head of state, it clearly shows a collision, because being a pupillage at that firm that was representing central bank, and this person had very clear instructions. And it seems it is a collision between the central bank, the office of the Attorney General, and this does not go very well. Because, Honorable Speaker, we've had cases of even out-of-court settlements in the past that have been done by the previous office of the Attorney General. and some of them have not been very favorable to the public. They've actually been scandalous or cantankerous in the sense that it fleeces the public of the trust that the high office of the Attorney General has been bestowed into. And being an office of the Attorney General of the Republic of Kenya, not even making a very serious presentation to challenge the case that was being brought, it shows that this was a typical collision, and it's a shame that such an office of high esteem that is held by the Republic that can be able to engage itself in this kind of collusion. Honorable Speaker, I find it very, very, very sad. Honorable Speaker, when you look at the issues that are being canvassed by Honorable Jude Njomo, they are very clear. And moving forward, I think this is something that needs to be supported. And Honorable Speaker, you know, technology also is moving. As time goes, there is change of technology. Now you have apps that are being put into their phones, and many of the youths are falling into traps of borrowing where they are not able to get even money. Occasionally you go home and the youth is asking you, no, I have a loan in a certain app, honorable member, please assist me to repay. It's very sad because these youth, we are training them, we are taking them to colleges and expecting that in future they are able to even get jobs and sustain themselves. Now they get jobs and they'll not even be able to get jobs because the CRP will indicate that this is somebody who is not able to pay. And it's also an embarrassment because when they start now coming to the honorable members to ask you to borrow money from you so that they are able to pay for the loans that they took from the apps that are very expensive again, and even above the interest that have been capped. Honorable Speaker, you realize that even many of the business people working outside there, you go and get a bank overdraft. When they get bank overdraft, actually what it means is that whatever business they're engaged in, it's just for, they are doing business for the banks. And I think it's a high time that those who are in the banking sector, they should realize that they are not there forever. They also have livelihood to sustain. They must also be able to look at comparisons within the region and even international standards to see, can we be able to bring down these interest rates such that we don't make it just that it's only the government now that is borrowing? Because what is happening is that as we bring down the interest rates, it is only government institutions that are now borrowing large amounts of money because the risks are low within government. And therefore, banks will be more comfortable doing business with the government, lending parastatals money and not lending the business people, not lending the wananchi. Honorable Speaker, you realize even the annuity program that we had, that the government was trying to roll out, it could not roll out because the interest rates that were being charged by the banks to our contractors were too high. And therefore, they were not able to, they could not be able to take up some of those constructions of tarmacking roads and doing whatever business it is there. We've now left our roads to only Chinese who are able to go to the Exim Bank, get cheap loans, and be able to come and do contracts within our country. But our own engineers whom we are training, our own other entrepreneurs who are willing to be able to invest cannot be able to access cheap loans because the banks have made it very difficult for implementation of the banking, of the capping of the interest to an extent that now even growing the economy, you walk out in the streets there and many Kenyans tell you there is no money in circulation. And with even the introduction of the central bank, where they have now made regulations that the minimum amount you can be able to withdraw should be less, the maximum amount should be less than $1 million, unless you have an explanation of why you are even withdrawing that or even depositing. So you'll find that many people outside there now would even prefer to put their money in the mattresses. And therefore, I think this is something that this House must clearly address itself to and must be able to support this bill that has been brought by Honorable Jude Njomo, who for the time I've been in this parliament, I think is a man I respect when it comes to financial issues. He's actually done his best in the 11th parliament and now in the 12th parliament on the same bill. And I think the people of Kiambu have good trust in a man who has the interests of this country at heart. With those few remarks, Honorable Speaker, I support.
Very well spoken, the Honorable Ukose. It is noteworthy that in that interesting case that was instituted against this Parliament, the Attorney General and the CBK abandoned, the Attorney General abandoned his submissions to join those of the gentleman who had instituted the suit midway. So it is a very interesting case. It is good that you have taken note of it. The Honorable Atandi, you will hold your horses because you are much lower on the list. I know you have interesting things to say too, but we shall now have the Honorable Wahungu to have a say.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. These entities or these banks, Mr. Speaker, they have taken advantage of the borrowers. Mr. Speaker, for someone to start a business, Mr. Speaker, that person need an approval by the bank or to get something or to be funded by the bank so that that person can start a business so that he can better his or her life. But Mr. Speaker, this trend is changing whereby the borrower is being exploited by the lending entity, Mr. Speaker. So it is good for this House, Mr. Speaker, to situate that the 4% which is proposed in this bill, Mr. Speaker, and which was ascertained to by His Excellency the President, Mr. Speaker, is taken to account so that, Mr. Speaker, the citizens of this country should not be taken for a ride by the banks, Mr. Speaker. At the same time, Mr. Speaker, the computation of the percentage should be according to the proposed law, Mr. Speaker. That should be an annual rating, Mr. Speaker, because in some lending entities, Mr. Speaker, you will see within a month they have recovered a percentage of around 10%, 18%, 27%, Mr. Speaker, meaning that the person who have borrowed the money, Mr. Speaker, is being just used as a vessel to just work for the bank and earn the profit for that bank which has lent to that person, Mr. Speaker. So it is good when Mr. Speaker, this law starts taking place, Mr. Speaker, because it needs some clarification to the banks so that now they can observe and use this law according to the way it has been stated, Mr. Speaker. I think it will be good for the law enforcers, Mr. Speaker, to take account for those who will have contravened, Mr. Speaker, this law, because you get to know or to realize that when this law was ascertained too, the banks didn't take a full action to implement. But it is good for the penalty which has been proposed, Mr. Speaker, a penalty of 1 million or a jail or a jail term for 1 year, Mr. Speaker, to take place so that they can learn that as a lesson, Mr. Speaker, and it can, and that one will also control them, Mr. Speaker, in terms of integrity and in terms of observing the integrity of the offices they owned in this firm, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, with those few remarks, I beg to support. Thank you.
The Honorable Mboko, member for Muhaya.
I've got one near here. Thank you, Honorable Speaker, for this particular chance to make a few comments on the bill presented before us by Honorable Jude Njomo. When in the morning I talked to him, like they did indicate to the House, there were fears amongst us and many Kenyans that this bill was supposed to actually negate the tag of 4% that had been introduced to actually curb the interest rates. But upon the mover explaining to us, I actually want to thank him for, one, having continued with the works of Joe Donde as a defender of the Kenyans on the issue of banking rates. I talked to Joe Donde sometimes back because we come from near each other, and he said it was very difficult to have this law go through. And Jude Njomo, this will continue even as you pursue this. I also want to thank you for being very, very cautious that the courts had given us. A rogue bank can actually just pay the 1 million continuously and continue negating the law as it was in the original law. So for me, I find this as a chance and a good chance to actually make a better law and protect the Kenyans. So, Honorable Speaker, on the onset, I want to say that the lending rates in this country have continuously inhibited the Kenyans from doing business. And the banks continuously try to make it sure that they circumvent the law. And the situation that Jude Njomo was explaining is a clear conspiracy which happens every day here in the country. You go to the courts, you sue the wrong person, but sue other people whom we have already talked to. And actually what they were simply entering with, because, Honorable Speaker, you are a lawyer, this was a consent between the CBK and Oduor and the other parties. So they walked away with it. And I want to thank the Parliament that it got enjoined, but we must warn them that we shall continuously remain the defenders of the normal Kenyan trying to do business in this country. And therefore, they should know that this is a law we shall not stop following, even when the finance bill comes here. And I want to thank the members who have made a comment on this, because we shall have to again see how do we stand with the normal Kenyan on the issue of interest rates and not allow this law go to the extent, even if the president will want to take over the lawmaking process, because of late, His Excellency the President is actually making too many laws by simply referring them here, exploiting our party differences and lineages, and finally walking away with a law that is not good for Kenyans. So this time we shall be asking honorable members, and I think Parliament has matured now. Since the time we began, we have gone through that storming stage, we are in the norming stage, and we should be now performing. When it comes to that finance bill, we should just perform for Kenyans, not for our party affiliations or anything like that. And therefore, Honorable Speaker, I want to say that this law is good, but it must capture the other players who have been talked about. I don't want to overemphasize Fuliza. The platforms that are lending Kenyan money and the other Shylocks are actually just circumventing this law. Yet when you look at it clearly, It's actually including the individual or any other person. So as this law becomes operational, I would really want to support and ask the implementers that we capture all other institutions that are lending money to Kenya so that they also operate within the 4% lending limit. The threat yesterday, Honorable Speaker, that by reducing the percentum interest on lending has made it difficult, or now the banks are unable to give money to SMEs is a fallacy. It is just created by the banks themselves. I'm a student of economics at my own level. And once you reduce the lending rates, we should have seen more money being given to SMEs. So this is being done intentionally. But could we go back and look at the times of Kibaki? President Kibaki inherits one of the weakest economies in Kenya after Moi. And just deliberately decides that he's not going to borrow from the banks. And the banks, me being a leader of the teachers, came to schools hawking loans, and it worked magic. That is how most of the teachers and other people at the low cadre were able now to borrow from the banks. Originally, Honorable Speaker, no teacher could have had a relationship with a bank. But courtesy of President Kibaki, coming out clearly that he's not going to do local borrowing in form of treasury bonds and treasury bills, the money was hawked in staff rooms. And that is what we want to see. And therefore, we are asking the government. It is the government, it is the executive that is encouraging the banks to actually not give money to the SMEs because they are over-borrowing locally. And they are paying a higher interest rate as compared to what the individuals would do. And therefore, for me, I want to ask the government, the executive, that could you also, we put a capping, or you stop, totally like President Kibaki did, from borrowing from the local market. And this will actually make the banks give loans to the SMEs, instead of we being threatened that this is not working, which is against the law of demand and supply. Honorable Speaker, I've made my contribution with those few remarks. I want to thank you, and I totally support this law, and ask the House to also remain hawk-eyed when the finance bill comes to the House. Thank you.
Honorable Mboko, you have spoken music to the souls of the many suffering Kenyans. We shall now have contribution from the Honorable Russell Ali, member for Saku.
Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, I rise to support this very important bill by my friend, Honorable Jude Jomo. Mr. Speaker, fundamentally what is before us is a petition filed by one Mr. Oduor. But this House must look deeper into what was the strategy behind filing of that petition. Mr. Speaker, the strategy of the petitioner was to knock out interest rate capping that was unanimously passed by this House in 2016. And if that position fails, was actually to put aside the interest rate capping through a very smart canvassing in the court. Mr. Speaker, in this petition, what actually clearly comes to light is the Central Bank of Kenya must be put in the spotlight. In this particular case, under Article 231(2) of the Constitution, actually talks about the independence of the Central Bank of Kenya. But during this particular petition, which, Mr. Speaker, you rightly alluded to, the Kenya Bankers Association and the Central Bank of Kenya appear to be in collusion, that the interest rate capping that this House passed several years ago should actually done away with. So in this particular case, what the petitioner set out to prove is that this House has usurped the role of the Central Bank of Kenya. And secondly, he talks about discrimination of the banking section of this republic. Mr. Speaker, this particular bill addresses itself to three principal functions, which is the Banking Act, Section 33B, which in the judgment, the judges rightly said that it is ambiguous, and they really wanted clarity on that matter. Secondly, it is about clarifying on the credit facility and what is a loan. And rightly, the Honorable Jude Jomo has come out clearly to say that instead of credit facility, we should actually talk of loan, because it is a known entity, it is suitable and comprehensive, and it sets out a clear understanding to the Kenyans out there. Thirdly, Mr. Speaker, what this bill sets out to do is to reaffirm the maximum interest rate, that when the interest rate is set by the Central Bank of Kenya, a bank should not actually go more than plus 4% of that interest rate set by the CBK. Mr. Speaker, a few fundamental constitutional points that why this House must be seized itself with the matter of finance and the economy in this republic is Article 95(2), that this House must discuss matters that resolves around issues of concern to our people. Secondly, 95(4), it is oversight. The Central Bank of Kenya, as an independent entity under the Constitution, this House must oversight its running so that its policies, its deliberation, its matters of jurisprudence of banking sector in Kenya must be seen to be proper and right by this House. Mr. Speaker, secondly is Article 94(5), where I think the petitioner maybe did not understand the role of Parliament. And Article 94(5), no person or body other than Parliament has the powers to make laws in this republic. Therefore, we are within our rights as legislators in this House to actually discuss and talk about matters that are of concern to the people of our country. Mr. Speaker, this is about pure and basic economics, because if we cannot talk about interest rates, we really cannot talk about entrepreneurship. We cannot talk about growing the economy. And we cannot talk about availability of money in the pockets of many out there on the street. We want our people to do business. Where is the money going to come from if the banks are going to charge such exorbitant interest rates that banks almost become a forbidden no-go zones. Mr. Speaker, Parliament must help in growing the economy. One of the things we are looking at saying 4%. When we follow the news, the Federal Reserve of the US, the Bank of England, they set the interest rates by actually almost saying if it is more than 2% is a lot. And sometimes the escalation of the interest rate is by 0.25. They are very clear in why they are doing that. We are a developing country as the Republic of Kenya. If the developed countries are able to do that, and yet they have grown in all sectors in the economy, and some of them, they control the world, why can't we do the same? Mr. Speaker, one of the projections in Vision 2030 is to grow, that the Kenyan economy will grow to the extent that Kenya will be a middle-income country. How does it become a middle-income country when by that time the business class, the middle class has not reached the extent that they are able to contribute to the economy? Mr. Speaker, there are issues of financial discipline. This is about the mobile money aspect. Sometimes we are told that let the market forces dictate what should happen in Kenya. I think we should not do that. The House must do its due diligence to look after the economy of this country and the people. With those many remarks, thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this chance.
The Honorable Nguna.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity given to me. Mr. Speaker, indeed, this is a very emotive topic, or rather, the bill Mr. Honorable Judy Joma has brought to this House. Mr. Speaker, sir, it is very difficult to speak when the economists like Wamalwa have spoken already about this issue. But allow me to add the voice on it. Interest capping rates actually works around the world, actually in most of the developed world. But Mr. Speaker, sir, of late, I have seen sub-Saharan African countries actually implementing this issue of interest rates capping. Mr. Speaker, I will recall that interest rates actually plays a very big role in terms of spurring the economic growth. Interest rates being one of the key macroeconomic variables in any country actually drives everything, all the macroeconomic variables like interest rates, inflation, GDP itself, and it is very important we focus on amendments on this bill brought by our fellow member here. I recall the history when this thing was introduced into this House back in the years. There were a lot of collusion by this, the banking sector, which is oligopolistic in this country in nature. And most of the banks actually resorted into issues of laying off the staffs. Most of the banks actually resorted into issue of borrowing from the government instead of lending to the more risky, small kind of loan seekers. And that is why we need actually to repeal the law so that banks can actually start lending the money to the consumers locally. Mr. Speaker, I would like to support this bill based on the fact that most of our youth, actually, who have got so many brilliant ideas in this economy, they don't have access to funds. They don't have access to capital. They don't have access to all these kind of things when they want to start a business. And for us to drive the Big Four agenda, actually, in terms of the manufacturing, in terms of job creation, we have to make sure we have got unlimited access to credits, and in this case, actually, cheap credits. Mr. Speaker, I know, and it's not actually a private matter, this one. Our president is one of the key people in the banking sector. And if at all we are going to successfully implement this law, we have to shed off the interest, actually the conflict of interest in this sector, and approve this bill. Because I recall Cervical itself, it is actually unscrupulously charging Kenyans in this issue of Fuliza, and many platforms which are led in Kenyans' money. So if at all we are going to extend this bill, the amendments to other platforms in regulating our market, in accessing the credit, it is going to help many Kenyans. And with those few remarks, without repeating so much, I support this amendment. And thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honorable Josire, member for Baringo.
Asante sana Mheshimiwa Spika kunipa nafasi ili pia niweze kuchangia mswada hii ambao umeletwa na Mheshimiwa Jude Jomo. Napenda kusema hata kama jina si langu Mheshimiwa Spika, kuna mheshimiwa mmoja alikuwa amesema anaitwa Judy Jomo, ambapo yeye nadhani si Judy, ni Jude Jomo. Nashukuru Mheshimiwa Spika kusema kwamba mimi pia naungana na wale ambao wanasema mswada huu ni wa muhimu, kwamba sisi kama Wakenya tumepitia mambo mengi kupitia kwa fedha ambazo tunaomba katika benki zetu, kwamba watu wetu wameumia sana tulipokuwa tumepatia nafasi kubwa benki zetu ziweze kufanya kazi jinsi ambavyo wanafikiria. Ni jambo nzuri kuona kwamba bunge hili la 12 limepewa nafasi na koti kuu ya Kenya, wakati ambao mtu mmoja anayeitwa Boniface Odwara alipoenda kotini kusema kwamba ile jambo ambalo lilikuwa limepitishwa na bunge la 11 kwamba fedha za Kenya watu wanapoomba wapewe kiwango fulani ambao watu wanaweza mudu. Yeye na wale walishirikiana walienda kotini ili waweze kusimamisha, wapatie nafasi benki zetu waweze kutoza watu ushuru ile wanaweza wao wenyewe. Tunaweza sema kwamba Mheshimiwa Spika, imekuwa ni jambo la kusikitisha. Mimi nikiwa mama wa kaunti wa Baringo County, ninapopata simu, watu wananipigia simu wa mama aswa, wakilia jinsi ambavyo wanatozwa pesa, wakiwa wanauza mboga, wako na shida mingi, manake wanakuja wanaitishwa fedha ambavyo hawana, ile kidogo wanayo wananyang'anywa, hata ng'ombe zao zinapelekwa, na wanakuwa na maisha ya hoehae kwa sababu ya hizi loans ambao wanaomba kwa Shylocks, ambazo hawajapatiwa njia ya kufanya kazi inavyoweza kufaidi Mkenya wa kawaida. Mheshimiwa Spika, ni mzuri kujua kwamba nyumba hii tumepewa miezi 12 ili kuangalia mswada huu tuweze kuibadilisha iweze kufaa Mkenya wa kawaida. Na ni mzuri tukimshukuru Mheshimiwa Jude Jomo, manake amekuja mbele hapa ili tuweze wote kusaidiana kuona kwamba mswada huu umepita. Mheshimiwa Spika, ni ukweli kwamba contractors nchi hii, wafanyabiashara kubwa nchi hii wameumia sana, manake hawawezi kuomba fedha waweze kufanya hizo biashara, na biashara nyingi zimeenda kule China, Mheshimiwa Spika, ambapo sasa fedha katika hali ya mabilioni zinatembea nje ya Kenya, ndipo sasa hapa Kenya tunalia kwamba hakuna pesa. Manake kama fedha hizo zinatoka nchi hii, zinaenda kufaidi nchi nyingine, itakuwa ni ngumu sisi tukiwa nchi hii na watoto wetu ambao hawana kazi, ambao wangefanya kazi za mikono, fedha zibaki hapa, ile pesa ingetusaidia kufanya pia biashara kubwa kubwa hapa nchini na kujenga na kufanya mambo mengine. Inasikitisha manake unaposikia kwamba uko nchi yao, uko Uchina, wao wanatozwa interest rate ya 4%. Huku kwetu tunaitisha 18 hadi 20. Haitakuwa ni kushindana kwa hali ambayo inayofaa, Mheshimiwa Spika. Mimi nataka kusema kwamba inafaa tuiangalie, tuweze kwamba kufaidisha Wakenya, ili kwamba Mheshimiwa Spika, kwa sababu Kenya ni nchi ambayo bado inaendelea. Hatujafika kiwango ambao tunasema kwamba tumeweza kujimudu. Ni mzuri kuangalia miswada ambayo inafaidi Mkenya ili Kenya iweze kunawiri. Mheshimiwa Spika, mimi nimependa mswada huu kwa sababu kuna mahali hapo inasema kwamba yule mtu anayesimamia benki ndiye anayeweza kuulizwa ajitokeze aseme ni kwa sababu gani ameenda kinyume na sheria ambayo itawekwa ya benki. Hii ni muhimu kwa sababu hapo mbeleni ilikuwa inasemekana tu benki, na haikuwa inawekwa kwa yule mtu anayesimamia benki ile kwamba atachukua mamlaka, atachukua ile shida ya benki iwapo wataenda kinyume ya sheria na kazi ambayo imetengwa na bunge hili ama sheria zetu. Mheshimiwa Spika, tukiangalia, nimesikia Mheshimiwa Juda akisema kwamba kuna shida nchi hii kwa sababu wale watu ambao wanarithi pesa ambao tunaita kwa Kiingereza kin, tunaita next of kin. Katika ile uwekezaji wa fedha, benki zetu, M-Pesa, hata hizi vitu tunaita Tala, hata hii tunaita Fuliza, hakuna mtu anayejua kabisa iwapo mimi kama Mheshimiwa Gladwell, bahati mbaya na Mungu anirehemu nisipate shida, kwamba sina maisha tena, tuko na uhakika gani kwamba bunge litaita wale, benki itaita wale watu ambao ni next of kin, nimewaandika pale ama nimemwandika, aje awaambie huyu Mheshimiwa Gladwell alikuwa na pesa kiwango fulani kwa benki yetu, kwa hivyo yule ambaye amewachiwa fedha hizi ni wewe. Tunataka kama Auditor General, kama hii kazi iko mbele yake, pia atueleze kwa hii miaka ambayo tuko, benki zetu zimebaki na pesa kiwango fulani ama kiwango gani ya Wakenya ambazo hazitaenda kuitishwa na wale watu wanaitwa next of kins. Manake hapo pia kuna shida. Watu wanakufa wakiwa na simu zao siko na fedha, hizo pesa zinaenda wapi? Hayo ni baadhi ya mambo pia tunataka kusikia kwamba zimeangaliwa ili Wakenya wasikae wakiwa na hofu, wakitaka kuweka pesa kwa benki wanaona hapana. Ndiposa unaona wengine wanaweka pesa zao kwa mattresses ama kodoro. Tunasema Mheshimiwa Spika, haya mambo yamekuja kwa wakati ambao unaofaa. Hii mambo ya uombaji wa pesa kupitia kwa simu, watoto wetu ambao ni wanafunzi, mimi nikiwa mmoja wao, kila wakati mtoto atakwambia mama niko na deni, mara usiweke kwa hii laini, wacha ninunue laini nyingine, atuma kwa rafiki yangu, sijui fanya namna gani, sijui inafaidi nini. Iwapo nchi hii tunaenda kukopesha watu pesa ambazo interest rate yao ni ya kila mwezi na sio kila mwaka, hiyo fedha, hiyo interest rate iko juu, inaumiza sisi wazazi. Manake wa watoto wanapoenda kuomba ile fedha, hata hawajaweka kiwango kuonyesha unafanya kazi gani, bora tu uko na nambari la simu unaweza kuomba pesa, na hawajui yule mtoto atakuja kulipa vipi pesa ile. Inakuja sasa kwamba ni bado tu ni mzazi ambaye ataenda kulipa zile fedha, ikiwa ni Tala, ikiwa ni Fuliza, ikiwa ni M-Pesa, sijui gani. Ni muhimu kwamba benki yetu kuu ya Kenya iweze kusimama imara ili kuweza kulainisha mambo ambayo yanasumbua Mkenya, kwa sababu haifaidi kitu iwapo benki peke yao ambayo iko na labda watu 1000 inaweza kufaidika na uombaji wa pesa kupitia ile pesa wanatoza Wakenya, na Wakenya wanaumia kila kuchao. Mheshimiwa Spika, ni muhimu kusema kwamba wakati huu tunajua mwezi unapoenda kuisha, noti zetu za 1000 ambazo ilikuwa imebadilishwa. Kuna Wakenya ambao bado wako na hizo fedha. Ni muhimu kwa benki zetu wakumbushe wale watu ambao tunaita clients, wawekezaji wao, wakumbushwe kwamba waweze kurudisha pesa. Manake nilikuwa natumai kuwaona hata wamekuja kwa runinga, watangaze pia wao wasaidie serikali kutangaza wananchi warudishe fedha zao, zirudi bengini, zile fedha za 1,000 noti ambazo zitaenda kukataliwa hivi karibuni. Mheshimiwa Spika, tulipoendelea kuongea, nimeona sisi kama nyumba la 12 wasungumzaji wengi hapa ambao ni waheshimiwa wenzangu, kuna kwamba wanaona hofu kwamba kwa sababu rais wa nchi hii pia anafanya biashara za benki, wako na hofu kwamba anaweza kuwa atakataa kupitisha mswada yetu. Naona si vyema kuanza kufikiria kwamba kuna jambo kama hilo. Ni mzuri tu kusema kwamba tukue na tumaini kwamba hata rais wetu ako na ile moyo wa kusaidia Wakenya, na iwapo tutakuja kupitisha mswada wetu atauangalia kwa kindani na ataweza kutupitishia ili tuweze kusaidia Wakenya. Asante Mheshimiwa Spika.
Member for Baringo, very well spoken, but the president is the president of all Kenyans. And I'm sure when he's looking at these matters, he takes care of what the interests of Kenyans are from the debate that emanates from this House. So I'm sure he'll be appropriately guided, and the spirit of guiding that office will be the guiding principle. The Honorable Atandi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to support the amendments as contained in the Banking Amendment Bill 2019. Mr. Speaker, though what we are discussing is occasioned by a court decision, High Court decision, I think these amendments that have been brought by Honorable Jude Jomo has actually made this law better, because now the law is very clear. The definitions on ambiguities have been clarified, and I think I fully support the amendments. Mr. Speaker, I want to inform the House that the big animal on finance bill concerning repeal of interest cap law is coming, and I think members need to be aware that the finance bill has recommended repeal of the entire law, Section 33B. So we are getting ready to tackle that when the time comes. But Mr. Speaker, there are certain facts which members of parliament need to be aware when canvassing matters to do with banking. One, that Mr. Speaker, banks are classified into three segments. The first segment is called Tier 1, and there's Tier 2, and there's Tier 3. Mr. Speaker, Tier 1 are those banks that are big, they are heavily capitalized, they make more profits, they are arrogant, and they are the reasons why we have a negative attitude towards banking profitability. Mr. Speaker, we have Tier 3. Tier 3 are basically the small animals within the banking segment. These are small banks that are not capitalized enough. They have challenges meeting their cash ratios. There are problems lending large tickets. They make small profits. So, Mr. Speaker, when members of parliament are canvassing matters, legislating on matters to do with banking, I think it's important for members of parliament to be aware that banks, there are small animals and there are big animals. And therefore, this is important for informing the kind of laws we are going to make to regulate the sector. Mr. Speaker, if you look at the financial sector in other countries, more developed countries, you'll find that the banks are few, like in China, banks are few and they are big. There are banks that can be able to give credit to governments. Our banks cannot, Mr. Speaker. In fact, our banks cannot even fund ideas. Our banks only want to fund ideas that are new ideas. They can't fund new ideas. They only fund ongoing ideas. So, Mr. Speaker, as a parliament, I think we need to get to a situation where we can be able to have large banks, where you can simply go with an idea and then they give you money and they give you a grace period, maybe 2 years for your idea to germinate. That does not happen today. So, Mr. Speaker, one of the things that I would urge this House to do in future is probably to encourage what is happening now, what is called consolidation. Right now, a lot of banks are consolidating. They are coming together so that we create possibly a few large banks that can be able to fund business ideas, that can fund this economy. There is no reason why when government wants credit from financial institutions, they have to go to foreign countries. They have to go to China. They have to go to Europe. Why should they do that? They are doing that because our economy is not supporting big banks. And I think this is something that this House, we need to look at and we need to appreciate. How do we create large banks that can support the economy? We can do this through consolidation. And secondly, let us also legislate on the capital requirements for banks. We need to increase the capital ratios for banks. Let us say that maybe to start a bank, you need to have 20 billion Kenya shillings. Then a bank with a capital base of 20 billion shillings is a bank that can be able to do business. So we will need to collapse these small banks and have maybe 6 banks in Kenya, 6 large banks in Kenya. So that will mean that maybe we need to look at the capital requirements for starting a bank. The other issue, Mr. Speaker, which we need to appraise ourselves to, is that there are fundamentals that are influencing banking activities, like the widening fiscal deficit. Every year we pass a budget in this parliament, which we are not even sure how it will be funded. We pass a budget and the deficit is very big. And then we expect the government not to borrow money from banks. So one of the things that we must do, especially in the coming financial year, is that we must ensure that we pass a budget which has a very small deficit, fiscal deficit. Then we will be able to say that government should not borrow from banks. Otherwise, if we sit here and condemn the government from borrowing from banks, then we are not being honest with ourselves. Because let us breach that fiscal deficit, then banks now will have no option. Government will have no option but not to borrow from the banks. This is the reason why, Mr. Speaker, I am happy that currently the executive is doing what is called budget rationalization. They are asking ministries to see what they can cut. This is something that we support and it needs to be done. The budget needs to be cut by half, by 50%. If that happens, Mr. Speaker, we are going to head somewhere. Mr. Speaker, when this law, when government or banks speak against this law, they are using what is called SME credit as a smoke screen to cheat parliaments and to cheat Kenyans that there are people called SMEs who need credit and that this law is holding them back. I want to say, Mr. Speaker, as a professional in the banking sector, that even if we remove this law, there is no way banks will give credit to SMEs because we will not be able to force them. They will still continue to give credit to people they consider creditworthy, to sectors that will give them more profit, and they can still refuse to give them credit. So, Mr. Speaker, the argument against interest cap law cannot sell. It does not carry weight. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, I want to urge the House that when we finally present the finance bill in this House, which has a ridiculous proposal to repeal the law itself in the entirety, let us reject that proposal and let this House stand with Kenyans in ensuring that the cost of credit does not go up. As we talk, Mr. Speaker, even at 14%, businesses across this country are unable to pay their loans. Today, CRB is continuing to list more businesses. They are doing that, Mr. Speaker, because the cost of credit is still very high. And there's nobody should cheat this House that the interest cap regime, which we are discussing now, is hampering businesses. It actually is trying to help businesses to a small extent. But if you want to compare the credit regime in Kenya and vis-a-vis other countries like South Africa, those countries, loans cannot be priced at even 10%. So, Mr. Speaker, we need to do much more, even to lower the cost of credit. But that will mean that this parliament must take decisive action in ensuring that our budgets are not, do not have a wider budget deficit. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I support.
Very well. Before I give to the next speaker, I will recognize the speaker's gallery, Mumui Secondary School from Kipipiri constituency, Nyandarua County. The school is welcome to follow the proceedings in the House this afternoon. What is out of order on Abu Dawood, Rahim? What's the intervention for?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would ask for your indulgence and the House's indulgence in discussing this bill of interest rates, because 10 minutes is a lot of time and there's so much interest, and I was requesting use it to either 3 minutes or 4 minutes, Mr. Speaker, so that many people can voice whatever they have to say regarding this, because it's very important to everybody. Mr. Speaker, I ask for your indulgence.
Very well, Honorable Dawood, you know I see what you are saying, and I hear what you are saying, but procedurally, if we were to reduce the time, that should have happened at the commencement of the motion. So that cannot be done midway, because some have taken 10 minutes, some we cannot reduce that. But you know, depending, looking at the interest of this law and the members who have registered to speak to this, if the members actually agreed to speak less time, we are going to have double the number speaking to this within the time that is remaining. So maybe you are convincing the members that those that I give will reduce their time so that then their colleagues will get a time. But let's see whether your suggestion is persuasive to the members. Let's see with Honorable Wachira Kabinga, who is next.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker, for giving me a chance to contribute to this very important bill. And I really want to thank the member for Kiambu, Honorable Jude Jomo, for being consistent in fighting for the interest of Wajiko when it comes to matters banking, Mr. Speaker. And may the people of Kiambu know that their son is contributing to their good welfare and to the rest of Kenyans. Mr. Speaker, I also want to thank the judiciary for having found it necessary to postpone the enactment of the judgment that was made by 1 year, so that we can have enough time to relook at this act and come up with these amendments, Mr. Speaker. The amendments being sought are straightforward. They are just making things clearer so that the ambiguities that were in the original amendment could be clarified, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in doing so, I also urge the Honorable member for Kiambu not to get tired, but move forward and also look at other areas of banking, including the mobile banking, Mr. Speaker, where we are also having problems. This also includes the informal sector that is completely ignored, Mr. Speaker, yet a lot of transactions do take place there. I'm aware, Mr. Speaker, where I come from in Moya constituency, where we do farming. Our farmers do not possess legal documents that would allow them to move into banks and get facilities, Mr. Speaker, and therefore we have the informal sector, people who have taken advantage of these farmers and they continue exploiting them. So it's a high time the Honorable Member for Kiambu, Jude Jomo, come in and look at that sector too. Mr. Speaker, another area that I would urge, and I can see the Honorable Member is so busy, he may not be listening to some of the key points that I'm raising, Mr. Speaker. The other area that he needs to look at is the microfinancing bill. When this bill was passed in 2015, came into act in 2016, the microfinancing institutions took it upon themselves to take to the lawyers who interpreted that the law does not apply to them, Mr. Speaker. And for that reason, Kenyans have been charged much more interest through the microfinancing. Some of the banks were innovative enough to have opened microfinances so that they can continue exploiting Kenyans, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, that's a sector to be re-looked at, so that this bill can directly also touch on the microfinancing bill. The interpretation has been, Mr. Speaker, that the bill is only affecting the Banking Act and that it does not concern itself with the Microfinancing Act. And that's how these institutions have been able to run away from this particular bill, Mr. Speaker, and therefore charging interest that is higher than the 4% capping over and above the central bank base rate. Mr. Speaker, there are many challenges that entrepreneurs and business community have been facing ever since this bill came into being, and it's a high time that banks re-look at some of the areas that they are putting strict conditions for borrowing, Mr. Speaker. I would argue that if banks could adhere to this particular bill, they would expand their lending base. More Kenyans would walk in, and therefore they don't need to look at one big fish, but small fishes that would end up in giving them the capital that they are looking for. And therefore these strict conditions, Mr. Speaker, which are really bad for upcoming entrepreneurs. Banks in the old days would be partners with would-be borrowers. They would even go to an extent of helping them to build business cases so that they can succeed as the bank is also making money. Today, Mr. Speaker, the banks are only interested with those people who have already, and institutions that have already succeeded in their work. They are therefore taking no risk. They are risk-free, Mr. Speaker, and that's why we are hearing billions and billions of money being made by these institutions, whereas our economy is at standstill or not developing, Mr. Speaker. I would therefore urge that our banks look at the advantages of working together with the would-be borrowers so that they can be partners and not just lenders, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would also urge the government to minimize on its borrowing from the banks, from the local banks. By doing so, Mr. Speaker, the banks have found an alternative to business lending, and they have turned to the government as their major customer. So as we are talking about this bill, Mr. Speaker, it's upon the government to also come in and support it indirectly by not borrowing as much, so that banks can find it necessary to adopt the recommendations of this bill and to reach out to the would-be borrowers without having to ignore them in the name of having alternate market, Mr. Speaker. As we do so, Mr. Speaker, we also need to ensure that there is much more civic education to our communities and business so that they can know their rights and responsibilities. One of the amendments being sought in this bill, Mr. Speaker, is to have the customer punished for accepting to be given loans and loans at higher rate than recommended here. This is something that most of the communities and business communities out there will take time to understand. We therefore would urge that there be a responsibility from central bank as a regulator to increase on civic education. Mr. Speaker, today, when some of our people borrow money, they do not understand their own statements. And in most of the times, the loan statements are never even given out. They never, therefore, know the kind of charges that have been levied on the loans that they have borrowed. Consequently, Mr. Speaker, we are seeing our business communities and our business sector going down, people borrowing, and instead of doing well, what we normally see at the end of the day are auctioneers that go for their goods, and they end up, Mr. Speaker, in some cases, even in Mathare, because that's something they never expected, Mr. Speaker. I'm therefore asking Central Bank to be for Wanjiko, because that's why they are there. As they support the banks, they must first and foremost know that they are there to support the business communities, the Wanjiko who is there, to ensure that she is not exploited, and to ensure that he is well educated to go through that statement to understand. It's ridiculous, Mr. Speaker. When somebody borrows 10,000 shillings and ends up paying 20,000 shillings, really, that is not developing a country, but killing it, Mr. Speaker. I've seen cases where people borrow for business 200 million, Mr. Speaker, and they end up paying 150 million out of that loan, Mr. Speaker. And because they are unable to do so, they end up being auctioned. So they struggle in the paying, they end up struggling in their living from that time. Mr. Speaker, this is something that needs to be looked at, because as much as we embark on the law, if we do not embark on civic education, our people will continue losing through ignorance, Mr. Speaker, if I may use that word. I know they are not ignorant, but they need much more education so that they can understand their statements. Finally, Mr. Speaker, the threats and stories that have been given by banks that this law is a bad one, Mr. Speaker, is not genuine. All they are not doing is to ensure that they reach out to the Raja communities. Kenya is growing in terms of population every day, and if banks can be innovative enough, they can tap a lot from the developing population in this country. Mr. Speaker, I support and once again urge my brother to be also keen on the informal sector. My farmers in Mwea are dying. We are selling land because we are getting money that is informal, that is not known, and our farmers are suffering. At the end of the day, they make nothing other than selling their land, Mr. Speaker. I beg to support.
Well, it is instructive for Honorable Dawood to note that Honorable Kabiga was not persuaded by that you take less than 10 minutes. He took exactly 10. Well, the Honorable Dawood had just persuaded the members if they took less time, they are definitely going to have we are going to have space for more members speak to this. But you know, we can't bite them. It was just a persuasion. But let's see. Before I give to Honorable Mutua Balasa, let's have Honorable Osotsi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity to also rise to support the amendments to the Banking Bill 2019. Mr. Speaker, as it has been said by my colleagues, that this bill arises from a judgment made by the High Court in regards to Section 33 of the Banking Act, which judgment said that this particular section was unconstitutional and discriminatory. This amendment by Honorable Judy Jomo, it's very timely, and I think this is a perfect amendment to resolve this issue of interest capping. Mr. Speaker, you should also be aware that Parliament has been given 12 months to make this amendment and have this law in place before the 14th March 2020, which is not very far from now. Mr. Speaker, this amendment will actually deal with the problem of some people have said abnormal profits. In my case, I think abnormal profit is understatement. It is astronomical profits that the banks were making before this interest capping came in place. So this is a very welcome bill. And Mr. Speaker, I want to say that the argument that they want to bring back the interest, remove the interest capping, so that they make loans available to SMEs, that argument does not hold water. And I want to agree with the Committee of Finance and Planning. This week, I saw they had rejected that kind of argument from the CS for Treasury, that the government should not be seen to be pushing the interest of banks and not wananchi. And that argument, Mr. Speaker, in fact, it gives us a reason why we need to have this capping in place. And I want to agree with the Honorable Wakungu that this is one bill that we need to pass and make sure that it goes through all the stages very quickly, if possible this week, so that we have this bill passed in the second reading, we have it passed in the committee of the whole House and taken to the President for assent. Because we have seen the finance bill is also proposing to delete this section 33 and basically take us back to the regime where we didn't have interest capping. I think, Mr. Speaker, when time comes for us to debate the Finance Bill 2019, we should reject that amendment. And if need be, if the President comes back with a reservation, we should be able to raise the 2/3 majority required to shoot down the President reservation. Because Kenyans have continued to suffer because of high interest rates. And Mr. Speaker, in 2016, when this law was passed, there was a lot of misinformation from banks. They told Kenyans that this new law will make it very difficult for them to recover costs. They told Kenyans that this law will promote slow growth in the banking sector. They told Kenyans that it will reduce service delivery in rural areas. They told Kenyans that it will lead to mass exit from the market. Mr. Speaker, nowadays you go to every village market, we have a bank. In fact, more than one bank. So that was a lie. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to say that in fact, this interest capping has had very positive effects on the economy. For example, Mr. Speaker, if I may demonstrate, the number of non-performing loans have generally decreased across all economic sectors because people are able to pay the loans back because of low interest rate. And that is a positive thing to the economy. Mr. Speaker, even the banks, they are still making profits because they have devised other ways of raising money. Two, they are still making profits because they have reduced general expenses, expenses which were incurring on issues of auctioneer fees, non-performing loans. They still have those expenses reduced, and that generally has affected their level of profitability. Mr. Speaker, we have also seen an upsurge in the non-interest income for banks. In fact, non-interest income for bank has gone higher than the interest income. And this is because banks have come up with other measures to increase the non-interest income through charges, through fees. They are even charging loan insurance on overdrafts. They are also charging extra fees on government securities. So, when they tell us they are not able to make money, Mr. Speaker, that is not true and is misleading. Mr. Speaker, the government appetite for borrowing, it is an issue that this parliament must deal with, especially government borrowing. Kibaki regime did so well in managing government borrowing. But now, we are seeing an upsurge of appetite for borrowing by the government. And Mr. Speaker, this is now where the problem starts. This is where the problem starts, and this is the very reason why we need to put in cappings. Because if we don't have capping, and the government continues with the appetite to borrow, then the interest rates will even go higher and higher.
So that is the reason why we need to maintain it. Because if government borrows from the economy, then you will have high interest rates, you will have higher interest payments, you will have tax rises, you will have even what we call crowding out of the private sector in terms of access to loans. So, Mr. Speaker, this bill is very timely. And one thing that the banks in Kenya should do, they need to reform. We have so many banks in this country, Mr. Speaker. I think we have more than 47 banks in this country. It is a higher time that the central bank introduce reforms so that these small banks can merge with the big banks so that we have very few banks. And this has happened before. In Nigeria, when they had so many banks, they came up with the reforms to merge the small banks so that we can have big banks. And now, Nigeria being the largest economy in Africa, has almost half the number of banks that we have in Kenya. And Mr. Speaker, these are some of the administrative issues and the policy issues that the central bank should be doing. Mr. Speaker, members have also talked about mobile money loans. I want to say that the Committee on ICT has come up with a report which was adopted by this Parliament, and CA, Communication Authority, and the Central Bank should take up the role, implement the report, and have Kenyans protected from unregulated mobile money loans. Mr. Speaker, for those very long remarks, I beg to support.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker, for giving me this opportunity to support these amendments. I support this. A big number of Kenyan population are low-income earners. This law seeks to protect them. There are very few Kenyans who will go to bank to look for a loan because the interests that are being charged are exorbitant, Mr. Speaker, very high. And even if you get a loan and you open business, the amount of money that you pay back to the bank is like you own this business jointly with the bank. It's like they are shareholders. So we must support this law. The Speaker, we must support this law, fight for it by all means, Honorable Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have very many young Kenyans who are graduating from universities and institutions, but there is no employment. Leaders of this country, we have been on the forefront educating them that they should employ themselves. How are they going to employ themselves even there is no money? The only avenue for them to get money to start this business is through bank loans, Honorable Speaker. And this law is going to support the creation of very many SMEs, is going to support it will reduce the percentage of unemployed Kenyans because they are going to venture into business by getting banks which they can afford to pay, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there is no Kenyan who doesn't support development, economic growth of this country. The drivers of our economy are SMEs. So this law, capping interest rates, Honorable Speaker, is going to spur development, especially in rural areas, Honorable Speaker, because we have rural women who do a lot of efforts by venturing into business, selling groceries, selling small things, Honorable Speaker, in the rural areas for them to support their families.
So this act, this bill, Honorable Speaker, is going to support rural development, and we must support this as a House as quickly as possible, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, this House has passed very many laws, very many legislation that are friendly to the rich people of this country. This is the only law that it targets to improve the lives of the Kenyan people who lives below the poverty line, Honorable Speaker, those who do business. And we must ensure that this law passes. We must ensure that we do everything possible, Honorable Speaker, to ensure that even as we debate this amendment by the Honorable Jude Njomo, that we also persuade our leaders, our friends who are of the contrary view, that this is not a good law, Honorable Speaker. I'm happy, Honorable Speaker, that these amendments are suggesting penalties to the CEOs of the bank who will flout these regulations, Honorable Speaker, that they must be guided by the law, they must follow this law, and those who will go against the proposed, or whatever this law proposes after it has been enacted into law by the President, Honorable Speaker, that they must also find some way to go to spend some time in prison. Those who will be in Nairobi, they can go. We will welcome them to go and spend their life and their life in Nairobi remand prison, Honorable Speaker. And I will be happy as a member of the Security Committee to increase the budget for their ration so that they can cool their heels in prison, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, for us to move forward, we must close our ears. I know it is important to listen to the banks themselves, but we cannot really open all our ears to listen to them. They must understand that when you are doing business, you must exercise patience and grow your net profit, but you cannot be the one that you want to become a millionaire in a short time by charging exorbitant interest rates. Let them be patient and grow their banking sector, not that they want to grow their banking sector in an overnight by charging exorbitant interest rates, by impoverishing Kenyans. That one, Honorable Speaker, is not going to be acceptable at all. And I know, and I want to tell this House, that those people, those Kenyan people who are against this law, these are people who are engaging in the banking business. And I want to tell them that Kenya doesn't belong to them only, but it also belongs to Mama Mboga. It also belongs to very many, even pastoralist communities that rely their livelihood on rearing cattle, that they also must be considered in terms of how much interest they will pay when they get loans from these banks, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, we should move forward as a House, expedite approval process for this law, and like my very good friend Osoze has said, even if the President refuses to sign or, this bill into law, we must bring to his attention that members of Parliament represent the people. The members of Parliament are representatives of the people, and the will of the Kenyan people, everybody in this country, agrees with this law that we need to cap interest rates, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, as I finish the support, let me end there so that I donate my time to my other colleagues also who want to contribute, and I will ask them to support. I am donating my time for you, not to oppose, but to support. I thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Well, you are almost done, Honorable Mutua. Your time allocated was almost done. So, shall we have Honorable Geshimo?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to support the bill. Mr. Speaker, one thing I I like and I am appreciative of the court that made the ruling is that they were in agreement that this is a good law for Kenyans. And that is why the court did not repeal Section 33B, but gave guidance on how to seek or to have some clarities on some issues. And one of the issues that clarity was being sought is on the issue of the credit facility. Because had it remained the way it is, then the section would have given banks a leeway to apply higher interest rates on financial guarantees, which would have created a lot of disparity in terms of advancement of loans to persons interested. Mr. Speaker, I note that economic growth in this country will not be attained by only giving money to Kenyans, but it will be achieved on how this money is given and how it can also help Kenyans in terms of having an interest rate that which is not punitive to Kenyans. And one thing that is good about this bill is that it gives uniformity on how banks should operate. If you have to give a different rate in terms of interest, it has to be below 14%, as currently, since the current rate by the central bank is about 10%. So we had situations whereby banks used even to give 28%, 20%, 22%. So it was a free market for all, and in whatever form the banks wanted to deal with the issues of interest rates. So this bill, actually, Kenyans should know that the bill had already passed. It's only that the clarity that is being sought. So it's not a new bill that is being introduced or a new law that is being formed, but actually some clarity on those issues. Mr. Speaker, this bill also applies to both banks and financial institutions. And I want to actually say that even micro institutions are also covered, because the definition of a financial institution, according to the Banking Act, is a company other than a bank which carries on or proposes to carry on financial business. And financial business is also further described as accepting money from members of public, and also employing of the money held on deposit on or any part of the money by lending. So any or investment, also any institution that lends money or invests money is also affected by this bill and this section. So it is a high time those who are calling themselves micro institutions to know that they are also affected, and they should also not charge interest rates which is more than 14%, whether they are macro or micro. Mr. Speaker, the other issue about this bill is that it also conforms with the Constitution as now amended, because it also affects both the borrower and the lender. Because one of the areas that the court identified is that it was a bit unconstitutional because it seemed to give a punitive aspect to the lender and left the borrower. So when you borrow money and knowing that it is a financial institution and you go and try to get money beyond what the Act provides, then you're also affected by this bill. So, Mr. Speaker, because a lot has been said about this bill. Everyone is supporting this bill, as I also support. I do wish, because of the interest of time, and because I would like as many members to contribute, would like to, because I have 10 minutes, I would like to donate my other remaining to Honourable Member for Kinangop, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Geshimo, you extended your grace so far, too far. You don't have that prerogative. The next one shall be Honorable Odhiambo Akoth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this opportunity. Mr. Speaker, even as I rise, I am just concerned at this new procedure of members donating their time and not the Speaker giving their time. And also concerned about the issue of ranking. Even though you are a lawyer and you understand ranking, it applies in the court corridors and must apply in the House. Mr. Speaker, having said that, I want to support this bill. And even in supporting this bill, Mr. Speaker, I want to say that Parliament has come a long way with this bill, from Joe Donde to Jacoyo and Honorable June Jomo that has been very consistent with this, and I want to thank him. And Mr. Speaker, I know that with the country, with the Atienos and Wanjikus on this world, it's a very popular law, but very unpopular with the banking sector. And Mr. Speaker, as a parliament, we must make sure that we do what is right by the ordinary Kenyan, especially going by what we are seeing globally. We are seeing rise of xenophobia in other countries. We are seeing very unfavorable immigration laws in other countries as well. And Mr. Speaker, in the past, when we had Kenyans that were capable and were not able to be absorbed in this country, many of them have then had to go to other countries. But as a country, we must fix our nation. We must be able to employ people both in the formal and the informal sector. And many of the Kenyans are employed as SMEs. And for them to be able to do that, Mr. Speaker, they must be able to access loans with favorable rates. Mr. Speaker, I want to disagree with Honorable Tongi when he was speaking earlier on, that a lot of Kenyans, when they take loans for social life, buying suits and all that. Of course, Mr. Speaker, there are few misguided people who will take loans to marry second wives and to buy suits. But on the whole, Kenyans are really struggling and suffering that when people take loans, they take loans for purposes of enhancing their businesses and not for those other reasons, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I want to say that if you actually look at this law, Mr. Speaker, after the Jude Jomo law was passed, there was a court matter, Boniface Oduor versus the Attorney General and others, on court petition 413 of 2016. And Mr. Speaker, one of the, or the two primary things that the court decided on was on the issue, one, of whether Section 33B 1 and 2 of the Banking Act were constitutional for being vague, ambiguous, imprecise, and indefinite. So what this law seeks to do is to make those provisions precise. The other issue was because it also declared subsection 3 of the same section 33B unconstitutional for being discriminatory, especially in regard to the penal provisions. And Mr. Speaker, again on that, this bill seeks to cure that, so that we do not have a case where we are having discriminatory provisions or where the capping is not very clear or imprecise. I know because we have a short time, I'll not say much, but I wish to support, because we are not, since the House really ideally already spoke to this issue, what we are doing is clearing what the court said. And I don't think there should be anything much, because every member that has spoken to this bill has chosen to stand on the side of Wanjiku and Atieno. I support and congratulate Honorable June Jomo, and if he has not yet won one of those orders, that the presidential ones, I would want to encourage that the House leadership would consider him, because he has done an excellent job. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, I support.
There's quite some campaign of some kind for Honorable Jude Jomo. But anyway, yes, you took actually limited time, so we'll have a few more members speak to this. Top on the list is Honorable Bunyasi John.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. I always stand with my friend Jude Jomo. We have had detailed debates, even though we can share a drink together, but we have different perspectives on this one. And I support the idea that we should lower costs to our small borrowers so they can be able to finance the business they want to do. But as a stance of a parliament in public policy, we should put government's feet to the fire. One, on the fiscal policy side, which is the expenditure side, the level of actual effective deficit is much higher than comes to parliament. Why? They overstate the amount of revenue they will raise, they have a big shortfall, so they must raise this money by borrowing domestic and external. And people the disadvantage of government borrowing domestically. So in this particular case, instead of raising interest rates, since it's capped, all they need to do is to fill the gap that is left by the small borrowers who will not be able to access credit because banks will not be able to lend to them. They don't lend to them because they can make the same money from a few large borrowers. So one of the things we must do is to rein in the amount of fiscal deficit, the amount that Treasury is spending by borrowing from these banks. We must confront them directly. We must not celebrate when we get trillion-plus budgets and claim they are the biggest in East Africa. It's a big disadvantage. That's one area. Second area, I think people have quoted the Federal Reserve Bank, the Bank of England. How many times has the central bank governor come to Parliament just to brief them on monetary policy? How many times has that been demanded by, say, our finance committee, so that they can hear from him what is going on in terms of discussions around liquidity in the economy? We don't. We all call him in when there is a crisis. He needs to be briefing this House no less than quarterly, perhaps even monthly, depending on what the movements are, so the House is abreast of the movements that are going to be made. Because if the banks were sitting on too much money that the national government was not taking, interest rates would come way, way down. 3, we are quoting countries that have interest rates towards 2%, less percent. One time Japan had near zero, effectively much less than 1% a year. But there are many things they do that drive the interest rates down there. However, here we are expecting that our SMEs will grow by borrowing from the commercial banks. There are many instruments that we have now abandoned. We used to have. These instruments include, and we have discussed this in this House and in committees, these instruments include special funds that government can put aside, even through banks, to lend at agreed interest rates, away from the monies the commercial banks raise through mobilization of deposits. India has had that very successfully. We can't put all of our many policy requirements on the interest rates. It won't work. 4, an interest rate is a price of money. But what the banks do, if you pressurize the interest rates, as it's part of the price of money, rather, what they do, and somebody has already said that here, the non-interest revenues rise. The origination fee, the application fee, the what fee, and so on. What I think we should do, and I've discussed this with my friend Jude Jomo earlier, not today, we talk about this many times. What we needed to have done is to have completed the process of disclosure. Banks had been moved to disclose the levels of interest they're effectively charging. But you are not included all of the elements of charges. If they're raising money, origination fee, application fee, whatever fee it is, these can be put into equivalent of an interest rate. So when you are borrowing, it says the loan you are taking at 5% interest is effectively an annual rate of 18. Why? Because there are all these other charges. So that we'll be regulating that effective interest rate rather than nominal interest rate that is quoted very casually when we are borrowing. Banks know they'll get around it. So that we need to look at very, very carefully. 3, these This restriction has made life a lot easier for the large borrowers, enterprises, perhaps individuals, and so on. Because we have left money in the bank now to be taken by the large borrowers. Even if the large borrowers are now borrowing at 13 point something, the volume that they take is going to compensate for what the small borrowers are doing. I support the intention that Jude Jomo is so passionately pursuing. And I want to really, despite the fact that I have a different viewpoint on interest rates, I am completely in agreement with him to pursue this point to logical conclusion. We must support Jude Jomo. We must support this House by broadening what it takes to lower interest rates. We should start with the fiscal policy side and get Treasury to tell us the truth about the amount of revenue they will raise so that they don't come in indirectly and take money through borrowing. Or, and somebody has mentioned here, the Treasury has called entities to ask them to cut the expenditure. Cutting expenditure may be good. It should be cut when the budget comes here, so we can look at what the budget would do to growth, to jobs, and to so on. If you go back now and simply tell water, return this amount of money, roads, return this amount of money, education, cut this one, and so on. We do not know what the net impact is on that. We need a front door squeeze of the expenditure level. We need to see where we are putting money, where we are taking money out of, so that this deficit we can all see in advance. That is going to help to reduce the pressure that is making our banks claim that they can't make ends meet. So, Mr. Speaker, sir, the time is limited, but I want to say we are far from achieving the objective we want, except a nominal reduction in interest rates. But actually lowering the cost for Wanjiku, growing the economy for Atieno, we are not there yet. I think we should look at all the instruments. And for heaven's sake, let us make the central bank governor a regular visitor to this institution. Let us make the Treasury Secretary a regular visitor to this institution, for them to talk to the truth, to be open and transparent, for us to assess effectively the impact on the economy. What we are doing is not going to get us there. With those few remarks, Mr. Speaker, I'm really pained to say I cannot support this amendment because it's not as comprehensive as it should be to address the problem.
I don't know what, all the members, why is there such an excitement around Honorable Mushomba? That consultation must really be done at a lower tone, clearly, so that then we hear what the members have to say about this. To my right now, Honorable Duku Kwenya.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for affording me this time. Well, I've been waited for long, but it has come finally. I wish to first of all thank and congratulate the Honorable Member for Kiambu, Honorable Jude Jomo, for being consistent in matters, interest capping, and of course the follow-up through to see that it brings this amendment following a court ruling, whereby Section 33B was, 34B was declared unconstitutional. And this is a testimony of what we're supposed to do in this House, legislate, in case there are issues of ambiguity in law, that he's doing exactly that. But on the same, I wish to contribute and base my debate on which is two-pronged. One, the issue of control of interest rate is very important for a growing economy like Kenya, whereby we do not have a perfect market, whereby forces of demand and supply dictate the price and the interest. And that being the case, this bill is timely. And making sure that there are no ambiguities is also a plus, because then our population is going to be shielded against unscrupulous banking practices, whereby we have banks that operate as cartels. There is some informal agreement on the level of interest that is charged to the citizens or to the borrowers of loans. And that being the case, the other issue that I would want to address is the issue of savings. You see, once we cap interest rates, on the other hand, depositors do not get some nice returns from their deposits or from their investment, and therefore, to some extent, there is a negativity in interest rate capping. But of course, the benefits outweigh the negativities, and therefore, I wish to support this bill and say that the issues that were not addressed by the previous, the bill that we are amending, or the act that we are amending, they are now addressed. Because not only financial and banking institutions extend money to borrowers. We've had cases of individual lenders, Shylocks, and now the law is quite clear that in case anybody contravenes this act, then they are liable to a certain fine and or imprisonment.
Honorable Kwenya, I'm afraid it is 1 p.m. In that case, we shall cut short your presentation.
How many minutes?
When this matter, the good news is that there is still time for this particular law. We are not concluding that today. That's why we haven't called the mover to reply. So the honorable members who still have interest to speak to this will have an opportunity to do that in a subsequent time. But Honorable Kwenya, when this matter comes back again, you will have your 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I oblige.
Honorable members. Sorry, members, the mic went off. The time being 1 p.m., this House started adjourned till Wednesday, 11 September 2019 at 2:30 p.m.